Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 181. Although the lightning was in his hand, it was difficult to use. PSSHT. An item that was difficult to control. It was as if it were saying, "You can't be my master." Should I give up on using it for now? A golden orb. Yuan had never used an item in this form. How on earth did Zeus use this in his eye? He put it in his hand, but he hesitated for a moment. The ultimate goal of taking the lightning bolt is for me to use it. Simply weakening Zeus's power to capture him was only half the battle. Furthermore, since the lightning bolt was an item that symbolized all of Olympus, its power was greater than any item that Yuan had obtained so far. This item could be considered Hephaestus's greatest masterpiece. Crackle, lightning bolt, refuses to be used. Blessing of the sea, fails to resist. A tingling sensation ran through his body. The triangle's skill, blessing of the sea, was not very effective at this time. The triangle was a water attribute. It was a polar opposite force to the lightning bolt, which had the power of electricity. Is it because I can't handle it with the pieces that I have? There were definitely cases where items chose their masters. If it was an ego-type item that the player had made and used themselves, it was possible for them to choose and reject their master. However, as far as Yuan knew, the lightning bolt was not that type of item. If that was the case, there was only one thing he could think of. Is Zeus's influence still remaining? The lightning bolt was an item that Zeus had used for thousands of years. Furthermore, it had become a part of Zeus's body as an artificial eye. There was a good chance that Zeus's influence remained, and that there were restrictions on the activation conditions. Does it mean that it can only be activated with Zeus's mana? I didn't expect this. A tricky activation condition. If he took his time and tamed it, he would be able to use it, but he couldn't use it right away. It was disappointing. He wanted to test out the lightning bolt right away. Crackle. That was when, in the sky, in the thick, dark clouds created by Zeus's power. In the clouds that seemed like they would strike with thunder and lightning at any moment, there was a familiar feeling. Is it the influence of the lightning bolt? He felt a more concentrated type of mana than he had felt before. Zeus, who had unleashed the power of lightning. All the remnants of lightning that remained above those clouds belonged to Zeus. Could it be? Hagen was also in those clouds. He must be exhausted after playing his part, but he would be riding the sun chariot. If that was the case. Pandora, who had put her broken arm back in place at Yuan's words, turned her head. She was already covered in wounds and could no longer participate in the battle. Throw me, throw. Her expression seemed to ask, why? Where to? Yuan lifted his head and pointed to the clouds above. Pandora approached Yuan with a confused expression. Really? Yes. With all your might. To those clouds. No matter how great Yuan's jumping ability was, he couldn't reach the clouds. He could jump up if he used Hermes's footsteps, but he didn't know if he could reach the clouds within 5 seconds. On the other hand, if it was Pandora. Whoosh. Pandora grabbed Yuan's arm. She didn't need to prepare herself mentally, but it was faster than he had thought. I'll throw you. Whoosh. His vision changed in an instant. It had been a long time since he had flown this high, overcoming gravity. Air. Yuan quickly regained his balance in the air. Skywalk is activated. Movement speed increases by 100% for 5 seconds. You can walk on the sky for 5 seconds. Fire Eyes reads the path. After regaining his balance. After finding the balance. The deafening noise that was ringing in their ears had stopped for a while. Due to the effect of the thunderbolt that fell, Poseidon and Hades staggered. Wu Wen confirmed the location of the sun chariot using the Eye of Revelation. It wasn't difficult to reach. Hagen was lying down on the sun chariot. He had lost half of his mind and barely raised his body after discovering Wu Wen. What? Is it over? Go to sleep over there. Hargan's help wasn't necessary for this task anyway. The piece of thunderbolt he had was quite large, but the piece Wu Won had to deal with now wasn't a piece, it was the main body itself. The power I can use is only a small portion, but... Rumble. The sound of thunder could be heard from within the clouds. Rather, it's much more beneficial for me if the thunderbolt doesn't listen to me right now. The thunderbolt wanted a familiar power. He could tell just by looking at how intensely it wanted the traces of electricity that were scattered around at the moment. It was the power that Zeus had emitted using the thunderbolt. Wu Won used the thunderbolt towards that power. Crackle. Thunderbolt reacts to the remnants of thunderbolt. It was a different reaction from before. Until now, the thunderbolt, which was not satisfied with Wu Won, had been fiercely rejecting him, but now it began to greedily devour the remnants of the power it had emitted. The remnants of the thunderbolt gathered. The enormous electricity that Zeus had emitted, which had been staying in the clouds, began to gather around the thunderbolt that Wu Won was holding. Wu Won, who was standing on the sun chariot and holding the thunderbolt, trembled at its power. This power was not something that the current Wu Won could have produced in the first place. Using it was out of the question, and even just being near it was overwhelming. However, that was why he had to endure it even more. Lord of Mana, resists, thunderbolt. Damage to mana is reduced. Piece of thunderbolt, strongly resists the power of thunderbolt. Resistance to electric properties increases. Fortunately, he had quite a bit of resistance to electric properties. The influence of the Lord of Mana was also quite helpful. Thanks to that, Wu Won was able to handle this thunderbolt much more easily. Now, let's shape it. He had succeeded in gathering the power. The problem now was in what form and how to release this power. From now on, imagination and the cohesion of mana were important. Form. When it comes to form, something familiar is better. Then, a sword. However, in a situation like this, he didn't know what would happen if he approached Zeus and swung his sword. Moreover, it was unknown whether he would be able to wield such a great power comfortably. In that case, then, a spear would be good. Perhaps the thunderbolt would be more familiar with that as well. Crackle. A spear of electricity began to form around Wu Won's hand. Literally, a thunderbolt began to form. A tingling sensation pierced his body. The taste of blood filled his mouth. Thunderbolt is created for the first time. Thunderbolt acknowledges you a little. Laughter burst out from within the message that appeared. Were you an ego? It was a fact that was not known before the regression, as it was an item that had disappeared along with Zeus's death. Wu Won laughed at the small betrayal and put strength into his hand that was holding the spear. Clang. I can only throw one. His arm was already numb. He looked down and saw Zeus rising through Poseidon's sea. And just in time, as if by appointment, Zeus was also looking at him. This is the power you were handling. Wu Won's body was pulled back like a bowstring. Spearmanship was the second most familiar after swordsmanship. Take this. The moment the thunderbolt was thrown from Wu Won's hand. Flash. A dazzling golden light swallowed the world. Splash. Seawater poured into the deep pit. It looked like another huge ocean had been created. The loud noise that had been ringing in his ears had stopped some time ago. Affected by the lightning that had struck below them, Poseidon and Hades staggered. What kind of nonsense is this? Is this Zeus's magic power? The two were undoubtedly brothers born from the same lineage as Zeus. No matter how long they had lived as humans, they could not have been unaware of the nature of the magic power they each possessed. The two of them raised their heads and looked up. The place where the lightning had struck. The figure of Wu Jin staggering on the sun chariot as he looked down below. It was not difficult to figure out roughly what had happened. Did he handle the electric shock that Zeus released? If so, it's not an incomprehensible situation, but... Hades stuck out his tongue at the situation that was currently unfolding. It's still amazing. No matter how he had obtained the lightning, his opponent was Zeus. The enormous magic power that even ordinary rankers would have difficulty approaching, was being wielded by a mere player. Just how much magic power control would that require? If it were him, would he have been able to control it like that? Hades couldn't be sure. This isn't simply a matter of being strong or weak. A skill that could only be used by those who had handled a top-tier item like lightning, and the power of a top-tier high-ranker like Zeus. Wu Jin had just demonstrated it with his own hands. This single blow instantly changed Hades' perception of Wu Jin. From an outstanding player who was hiding a secret, to something more. Now, he was even fearful. Because he could not fathom how far someone who had even gotten their hands on lightning would go. And that look. Phew. Wu Jin, who had thrown the lightning, staggered for a moment, beads of sweat pouring down his forehead like rain. It was too much magic power for his body to withstand. No matter how much he tried to drain as much magic power as possible with his control, he couldn't help but be affected by the electric shock. No, it might have been a miraculous result. To throw a lightning bolt of that level with his current stats. It's still not enough. He knew it was greed. He was only in his early 40s. But even now, he was looking far too high. Zeus. A top-tier high ranker, in the same league as his previous life. Comparing the current him to Zeus was greed, and he was well aware of that fact. But, even so, I can be greedy. The progress of his plan was much faster than expected. Originally, he thought that he would be able to finish Olympus, which he had thought he would finish when he was on the cusp of becoming a ranker, or at the latest, right after he became a ranker. Furthermore, he had now acquired another growth path that was not in the plan. This is enough to put him in a difficult position. Crackle, sizzle, the sea of electricity that had not yet been extinguished. Wan reveals the truth. Now, take it out. Wu Jin looked at Zeus's eye, which was floating in it. That eye was still not closed. Also, it had not yet disappeared. Swish, Zeus's eye closed, and for a very brief moment. The eye that had been taken away by the lightning, the one that remained, slowly opened. It's out, a purple eye, the faint energy of the outer that could be felt within it. A fragment of something that the chaos of this tower, like Pandora's box, had planted in his body. A fragment. Wow, Dana cheered at the appearance of that eye. Now, there was only one thing to be careful of. To eat it slowly so as not to get an upset stomach. Chapter 182. Pandora's body trembled. No, she was shivering. She didn't know why she was doing this all of a sudden. The trembling started slowly, then it got faster and faster. Why is this happening? The battle seemed to be over. A bottomless deep pit, a lightning bolt powerful enough to blow away several cities fell over Zeus' head. Zeus, who had lost his lightning, was weakened, while Poseidon and Hades became stronger than before. More than anything, Zeus no longer had the power to stop Heracles. But why? Why does that weakened Zeus feel scarier? Pandora, who had been crouching and trembling, barely raised her head. The color of the clouds had changed. The sky was tinged with purple. And the ground. This air felt familiar. The box. A nightmarish memory suddenly came to mind. Pandora's face turned white. This is the day she opened the box that Zeus had given her. A terrible force and all sorts of negative emotions burst out of the box, and Pandora went in and out of it for a while. The box I opened is the same as this. Swish. Zeus, who had been floating on the sea, rose up. Poseidon, who thought the fight was over, got up from his seat, leaning on his trident. If I had known he was that tenacious, that bastard's ranking would have gone up by another digit. He was a dying man now. Poseidon intended to finish him off. If I kill him with my own hands, my ranking will go up a little more. It would take quite a while to get out of Asgard's prison, but he could afford that much time. After all, the power of this tower is determined by the ranking. If he kills Zeus and his ranking goes up, he will eventually be able to plan for the future. Cuckoo. That's why Poseidon approached Zeus. That moment. Hold on. Heracles blocked Poseidon's way. Poseidon frowned. He's your father, and you're going to be greedy for his life. Heracles' face turned sour at the greed in his eyes. Isn't he your brother, great uncle? So, are you going to spare his life? That's not what I meant. Not really. The tension from just a moment ago was nowhere to be found. It's bigger again. Father. Bigger. It was incomprehensible. No matter how much Zeus he had lost his thunderbolt and was now covered in wounds. The current Zeus was someone that even Heracles could handle alone. What in the world has gotten bigger? Poseidon looked at Zeus's outer appearance, but it looked no different than before. At most, he had gone from lying down to standing, but Zeus, who had lost his thunderbolt, was still ugly and unsightly. His greed didn't disappear. Poseidon stirred up the water. Swoosh. If you won't do it. Grandfather. Riding the waves, Poseidon charged towards Zeus. Heracles stretched out his hand towards Poseidon, but Poseidon, who was already riding the waves, was far away. I have no choice. Weeing. The tip of the trident aimed at Zeus's head. The ocean rose and moisture gathered at the tip of the spear, and the spear, containing an enormous amount of water pressure, looked as if it would split Zeus's head in half in one breath. But in the next moment, swish, Poseidon, who met eyes with Zeus, who had raised his head, froze in place like an ice sculpture. What is this? His eyes had turned purple. Poseidon had never seen Zeus's eyes like that. It wasn't simply that the color had changed. Unlike his original eyes that had infinite magical power hidden within them, that was a different power that was beyond reason. In an instant, Poseidon saw Zeus as a completely different being. A monster that could swallow the entire ocean whole. Or, like a scorching sun that could turn all the oceans into nothing. Just his existence alone was the exact opposite of himself, a monster that was uniquely his own, standing right before his eyes. And in that moment, clank, the monster slowly opened its mouth before him. Boom, lightning struck from the sky. It was much weaker than the first, but Poseidon came to his senses at the flash of light before his eyes. A strange back appeared between Zeus and Poseidon. Get out of the way. Kim Yuan, a single person who had fallen down with the lightning. He was clearly Yuan, who had thrown the lightning at Zeus. This is my prey. Gulp. The tension from a moment ago was completely gone. Instead, Poseidon questioned Wu Wan's words. I acknowledge your abilities, but what can you do against my master? Wu Wan's abilities clearly surpassed even the best rankers. No, even if he surpassed the rankers, it was enough to convince even the high rankers. With the addition of the Thunderbolt, his abilities were without a doubt. But his opponent was Zeus, a high ranker in the single digits. His ranking would have dropped considerably now that he had lost his Thunderbolt, but even so, it was clear that he was among the ranks of the three gods. Wu Wan was not yet a match for Zeus. If he went all out, he would be dead in a matter of seconds. Of course, I'm not going to fight Zeus. Wu Wan knew that too. He was not yet a match for Zeus. Even if he had taken the Thunderbolt. His opponent was a high ranker with high stats, as befitting his single-digit ranking. He was still a difficult opponent for him. That's why, at this moment, Wu Wan knew exactly what he had to do. What I have to do is. The purple color that appeared in Zeus' eyes. In Wu Wan's eyes, which met it, a landscape of despair unfolded. It's a guy with no special form. I've seen enough of this kind of outer. It's a tough opponent for someone who's facing an outer for the first time. Anyone who's alive is afraid of something that's beyond common sense and perception. Zeus' power was not simply large and threatening. Its nature was not that difficult to understand if you looked at it closely. Fear of the unknown, confusion about something beyond their understanding. Zeus simply stabbed his sharp electric shock into that gap. Did you succeed in controlling it? If so, that would be amazing. In the first place, it was nothing more than a seed that the foolish chaos sowed in the hope of creating chaos in the tower. That's why it couldn't be controlled, and it didn't exist to be controlled. But to think that he would use that power by planting it in his eye. I was amazed at the power that Zeus possessed. It's not for nothing that his ranking went up. Currently ranked 9th. The fact that his ranking had jumped up 4 more steps to 5th in the future was not simply due to the power of the outer. The reason was simple, Zeus. It was because he was that strong of an existence. Surely, it'd be much easier to handle it now than back then. Yuan looked at Zeus in the eyes without avoiding him. Poseidon must have seen something he feared the most through those eyes just now. And that was the scariest part about that power. On the other hand, it was a familiar power to Yuan. It's fake anyway. The outer, beings that exist outside of the tower, a collection of all worlds. The scariest thing about them was that they were impossible to understand. It was the same with Yuan. He had fought countless times for a long time, but Yuan still didn't understand them. But that didn't mean he was scared. To be scared. Yuan had been through too much to be scared of something like this. You're a little kid. Yuan had seen greater despair. Foolish chaos, frustration that felt like being stuck in a swamp, foolish disasters. And despair that covered the heavens. Yeah, when it came to despair, there was no one who could surpass him. Compared to that bastard, this was just a nightmare. A dream-like illusion that would disappear once he woke up. Yuan looked at Zeus in the eyes without avoiding him. And at that moment, gulp, Yuan, like Poseidon, was sucked into the endless abyss. Deep, very deep, Yuan felt at ease being cut off from the world. This way, he would be able to fight the outer, not Zeus. You made a mistake. In the deep swamp that he had fallen into. What Yuan faced in there was a monster that couldn't be defined as a single form. Chomp, the monster's mouth, which was hard to gauge its size, opened wide to swallow Yuan. The monster had existed to swallow this world. But that power was contained in Zeus's eyes, and it had been suppressed until now. How long had it been? For it to come out like this and open its mouth to try to devour something. A form that was neither this nor that, mixed with all sorts of animals and monsters. It was the despair that Yuan had been hiding inside him. This vague form, because a guy like you wouldn't even be able to imagine what my despair is. Thud, thud, Yuan took a step towards the monster. The monster was also inside of him. That's much bigger than that guy. The predator bares its teeth. Another monster that began to bare its teeth. The maple leaf that had been in the shape of an egg revealed itself on Yuan's shoulder. Boo! The maple leaf spread its arms and greeted the guy. It was as if a little kid was reaching out to a cute animal. And that moment, swish, the form of despair that had unfolded before his eyes faltered. The guy threatened Yuan by changing into countless, immeasurable forms. No, it was protecting itself. There was one reason. Wah, wah, a small hand reached out to Outer while growling. But each time the hand approached, the guy flinched back a step. It was just like a small animal trembling in fear. Is this guy wary of it? It was afraid of this little guy on his shoulder. The existence of the maple leaf was also a natural enemy to these guys. Also, the power he had gained through the maple leaf was the same. I don't know how it was in the past. And below the guy. Creak, something huge opened its mouth. Right now, I'm a bigger predator than you. Thud, begins, predation. Zeus and Yuan stood face to face. They didn't do anything, they just looked at each other. Poseidon wondered about this strange situation. It hadn't even been a minute, but what the hell had happened? He said he was my opponent, but he's just standing there. Poseidon glanced at Zeus. His eyes were unfocused. For some reason, he felt like a surprise attack might work right now. He definitely thought that in his head. But he couldn't move his body right away when he recalled what he had seen just a moment ago when he had charged in with the same thought. What the hell was that? Until that was resolved, Poseidon couldn't move rashly either. Zeus, left eye. He didn't know what was hidden in that eye, but it might be more dangerous than the lightning bolt in his right eye. How many minutes passed like that? Swish, Zeus' eyes, which had been tinged with purple, began to turn black. Chapter 183. Crunch, crunch, I now know what that teeth that was munching on the outer was. Predator, a skill that Dana had, and now belonged to Yuan. However, Yuan still couldn't understand it. It's like they're fighting each other, outer versus outer. The first form of the egg was the same. The purple pattern. And as the hatching percentage increased, a familiar color began to show. Because of that, Yuan thought that an outer would come out of it. Of course, the result was unexpected. Who would have thought that a small fry the size of a palm would come out? The outer that Zeus possessed resisted fiercely. It was a completely different reaction from the already dead corpse of Yamata no Orochi, the dying Lancelot, and Pandora. However, no matter how hard it resisted, the positions of predator and prey would not change. Chomp, the thing's head was bitten off, and it gradually became weaker. Yuan felt goosebumps all over his body as he watched the sight. Would there come a day when those teeth would be directed at him? If so, he absolutely refused. He already had enough opponents to fight, and he didn't want to fight something like that too. Munch, munch, the teeth ravenously devoured the outer and then stopped for a moment. It then turned its teeth towards Yuan. Was it looking for something else to eat? Or, is it asking for praise for a job well done? It felt different from before. The strange and uncanny thing felt a bit more familiar. The reason wasn't hard to find. Wow, the thing on his shoulder was patting its full belly and making a fuss. This thing was that thing. Dana's level has increased. Dana's level has increased. Dana's divine energy has increased by 15. Growth rate has increased by 12.57%. Magic power has increased by 5. Despair that eats dreams has been subjugated. 300,000 points have been acquired. It was the first meal after hatching. The thing seemed satisfied and quickly fell asleep. Holding Dana, who was swaying dangerously and about to fall, Yuan became lost in thought. 5 stats. The 5 stats. He must have seen the predator with Yuan. Zeus must have seen and felt it more clearly than anyone else, the larger outer devouring the smaller outer. It was never low in value. No, it was excessively high. So much so that it seemed like it was too easy to get his hands on the stat. However, at this moment, Yuan didn't care about the 5 stats. Divine power. Now that he thought about it, what was this even used for? It was the only stat that was abnormally high. Dana didn't seem like the type to fight in the front in the first place. She fought the outer using the predator, but that was just one of the skills she had. Divine power. If translated directly, it meant the power of a god. Was it the energy possessed by the outer god? There wasn't much he could figure out yet. He would have to gradually confirm it. He would spend a lot of time with this girl anyway. What kind of skills she had, what divine power was. Once her growth was complete, what kind of appearance she would take on. It was something he would gradually find out as time passed. Well, thanks to that. Swish, the purple-tinted veil of the world was lifted. I was able to easily solve the biggest problem. The outer that Zeus possessed. Its name was, Despair that Devours Dreams. It was a monster with a size and strength that even the average high ranker would have a hard time handling. As such, it was unknown whether the current U1 would be able to handle it. Even if he had a lot of experience fighting the outer. Originally, he would have joined hands with Heracles to fight it. But thanks to the power he had unexpectedly gained, there was now an easier way to fight the outer. Of course, the monsters he had encountered so far were only a very small portion. The test was a success. Now that he had confirmed it, he was relieved. This power could definitely become a spear that could pierce through the hearts of the monsters. As time passed, swish, the eyes that had met Zeus. The world that had changed because of those eyes returned to its original state. And soon, U1 saw Zeus, black water flowing from one of his eyes. You had it too. Zeus's voice was calm and flat. But his yellow hair had turned white as if it had been bleached, and his face had also turned pale. This power that came from above. A voice rang out from within him. U1 shook his head, wondering where the above Zeus was talking about was. Quote? A question appeared on Zeus's face. A question appeared on Zeus's expression. He definitely saw the predator with U1. Zeus saw and felt the bigger outer devouring the smaller outer better than anyone. And yet, U1 denied it. Not from above. U1 slightly opened his lips and answered. It's from outside. Outside. It seemed that Zeus thought the power he possessed came from above. The fragment of the outer that the foolish chaos had given him. The power from above that Zeus had so desperately wanted was the power that would eventually lead them to destruction. Well, whatever it is. Rustle. Zeus's hair drooped powerlessly like dried seaweed. It's over. Everyone's gazes turned to Zeus. Poseidon, Hades, Pandora. And Heracles. Zeus's lips curled up as he met their gazes one by one. Do you hate me? Snap. Heracles gritted his teeth at that question. Poseidon gripped his trident, and Pandora shook her head. Each of them had different reasons for being here. Zeus knew that, but one thing was for sure. They were all his enemies. Then come at me all at once. Boom, lightning erupted from Zeus's hand. Now that both his thunderbolt and the power of the outer were gone. All he had left was his bare body. And now, boom. Heracles finally swung his fist at Zeus, who was now completely defenseless. The fight that followed was more like a fight between Zeus and Heracles. Heracles, whose eyes were clouded over, didn't look back anymore. In the first place, he was here more for his mother Alcmene's revenge than for any particular purpose. Crack, even without his thunderbolt, Zeus was still Zeus. Even though he had lost both of his eyes, he fought against Heracles with just his bare body. No, if his body had been completely intact, he would have shown skills that surpassed even Heracles. This is amazing. U1 watched Zeus staggering in front of Heracles. The ground had collapsed, the bedrock had split, and there was no longer any trace of the city around them. Amidst it all, Zeus stood with his eyes closed, still maintaining his regal bearing. Didn't you want revenge? He had clearly been defeated. As far as Wu Yun knew, Zeus had no more tricks up his sleeve. He was stubbornly persisting in a battle he had already lost. Then you must not have a moment to spare, my son. Are you really my father? Your power comes from me. Even at this moment, Zeus was proud of himself. To be precise, of the power he possessed. Of his genes. That alone should be enough for you to be grateful to me. Is that all it takes to make you my father? There are those who would gladly give their lives for that one thing. Just that, how disappointing. His words weren't entirely wrong. It wasn't for nothing that outstanding players selected from the world were referred to as pure bloods. They inherited talent, the talent to become outstanding players, outstanding rankers. And in terms of talent alone, Heracles was one of the most outstanding beings in the tower. It was a precious treasure that could not be obtained even for 1,000 gold. However, I see clearly now, although it was a short conversation, Heracles made up his mind because of those words. You are not qualified to be a father. The relationship between Zeus and himself was not that of father and son. Boom, zing, Heracles' fist struck Zeus in the side. With a sickening crack, Zeus's body was sent flying. Heracles was also covered in wounds. But at the moment, Zeus was in no better condition. Creak, mustering his strength, Zeus barely managed to steady himself as he was sent flying. It was the last shred of dignity left to him as a king. An unyielding posture. At this moment, Zeus was fighting even as he accepted his death. My fight is over. Wu Yun turned away. There was no place for him to intervene in that fight any longer. It was a fight that he had no need or reason to be involved in. He had taken the lightning bolt he wanted. The remnants of the outer he had considered a problem had been devoured by a predator. All that remained now was the fight between Heracles and Zeus, the father and son, the enemies. Wait, just as Yuan was about to turn around. Aren't you leaving in a bit of a hurry? Don't you think we have a lot to talk about? A sinister voice rang out from the jets of water spurting up everywhere. Yuan sighed. He had a feeling this would happen, but he still wished he could avoid this nuisance if possible. I thought we would split it half and half. Yuan turned his head. Disheveled blue hair, over 2 meters tall, with handsome features similar to Zeus, who was fighting over there. Yuan met the gaze of the blue eyes glaring at him. Did we have something to talk about? Poseidon, the ruler of the sea and one of the 3 gods of Olympus, was looking at him. This is the first time I'm meeting you today. He didn't want to clash with him here if possible. No matter how injured he was, his opponent was a supreme god. He was also a high ranker within the top 100. He wasn't an opponent he could fight yet. Yeah, it's the first time. Same for me. Poseidon's eyes held complex emotions. Greed and resentment, curiosity and fear, they were all directed at Yuan. But I do have something that belongs to you, so it's not like we're complete strangers. The stone of the sea. Yeah, that, although it wasn't for very long, Poseidon had experienced the power of the stone of the sea. That power was truly fascinating. In reality, the stone of the sea was an item that suited Poseidon much better than Yuan. An item's value is determined by who wields it. There was a reason why the stone of the sea had ended up in Poseidon's hands in the first place. It would be even better if you gave me the thunderbolt, too. Yuan sighed at Poseidon's provoking words. Of course. Known as the most gangster-like of the 3 gods, he wouldn't be satisfied with just the stone of the sea. It seemed like he thought Yuan wasn't needed anymore since the fight was over. Of course, if you need it that much. Yuan had no intention of handing it over so easily. Pajak, a golden item that vibrated and released electricity on its own. Kuwuk, gripping it tightly in his hand, Yuan sneered at Poseidon. Come and take it from me. Chapter 184. Just try to take it. Poseidon was rather taken aback by Yuan's confident attitude. One could tell just by looking at Zeus over there that his actions were not simply a bluff. Is there something else he has up his sleeve? Poseidon was rather taken aback by Yuan's confidence. Of course, his own power was still superior. However, Yuan had the ability to turn the tables. And at that thought, that maybe even this current scene was part of his plan, Poseidon suddenly felt a sense of unease wash over him. But that feeling didn't last long. It's a bluff, after all. This battle was destined to end in his victory. Heracles, who seemed to be close with Yuan, was focused on Zeus. There was a high probability that he would step in if Yuan were to be attacked after the battle was over. Furthermore, he himself would have to return to Asgard's prison once this battle was over. This was his only chance to get his hands on the thunderbolt and the sea stone. It has to be now. You asked for it. Swoosh. Moisture gathered around Poseidon, and the magic power that had been condensed dispersed and spread into the atmosphere. Don't regret it. Gulp, gulp. Poseidon's magic power began to crush Yuan's body. It wasn't a special skill. It was water pressure. It started. There was no need to prolong this battle. No, if he were to prolong this battle, he would lose. He had to end this as quickly as possible. Poseidon must have known that too. Swish. Poseidon's trident shot out through the waves of water that had spread out in all directions. At the same time, Yuan's armor, triangle, reacted. Wang, the moisture that had been dispersed in the atmosphere shook. Poseidon's influence and triangle's influence collided. The moisture was momentarily immobilized. Poseidon, who had paused for a moment, moved his trident again. Whoosh, bang, the tip of the spear that had struck the ground split the floor into 3. It was then that Hades, who had joined Heracles in fighting Zeus, noticed Poseidon's actions. Poseidon, Hades twisted his body. He could leave the fight with Zeus to Heracles for now. The current Zeus was at a level that Heracles could handle on his own. However, if his relationship with Yuan were to worsen in the future, it could become difficult for Olympus. That idiot. Poseidon gritted his teeth at Hades' reaction. Hades was the same as always. As things were, he didn't have much time left. All that's left is, screech, the magic power that had paused for a moment began to move again. Bubble, bubble, the sea stirred. The sea, which had been rippling as if it were alive, soon moved as if it were angry. Waves moved along the tip of the spear. There was only one way now. A head-on breakthrough. Just crush Yuan in one breath and take his belongings. Screech. A giant wave washed over his body. It swallowed Yuan like the mouth of a monster. Even with the power of the triangle, his opponent was Poseidon. An opponent who couldn't scatter his magic as easily as Theseus. A head-on breakthrough. Poseidon's thoughts were as clear as day. It wasn't a bad idea. When there was no time like now, going forward was the answer rather than turning back. Then it was time for him to give his answer to that question. Crack, lightning flickering in his hand. The bastard was talking. That he could fight, let's take him up on it. The situation wasn't bad. Even Poseidon wouldn't be able to properly exert his strength while under the influence of the triangle. Furthermore, he had a lightning bolt in his hand, an item that was the ultimate counter to water attributes. Crackle, lightning, is created. Quiney, reacts to, lightning. The lightning in his hand turned black. Yuan's hand stretched forward. And the next moment, boom, Poseidon's wave crashed over Yuan. Boom, the waves crashed down onto the ground. The strong current turned rocks to dust and lowered the ground. Poseidon, who had changed the landscape with a single gesture. Hades ran towards such a Poseidon. Poseidon, swish. Hades grabbed Poseidon by the collar. Although it was lacking compared to the magic he usually handled, this level of power was enough to crush and kill a few high rankers. Why in the world would you do such a thing? Yuan was a benefactor of Olympus. Because of him, Heracles found his way and was able to prevent a great war that would have stained the tower in blood. He was able to succeed in breaking Olympus, which was nearly impossible. But then Poseidon killed Yuan with his own hands. Hades' eyes shook with anger. But, no, what? Hades looked at Poseidon's expression. Poseidon's eyes wavered. Just a moment ago, he had been full of energy, but now he was muttering powerlessly while being held by the collar. It's a failure. A failure. Hades' head turned. The spot where Yuan had been. A line had appeared in the spot where the giant current had struck. It was a familiar scene. Surely, Zeus, who had blocked Poseidon's current with one hand and parted the sea. His appearance overlapped with the figure of a single person. Whoosh! Within the parted current, Yuan walked out. Looking at his figure, Hades felt a chill run down his spine. I can't believe it even after seeing it in person. The first time he met Kim Yuan. That first meeting seemed pathetic now that he thought about it. To think that this guy actually blocked Zeus's lightning. This guy really blocked Zeus' lightning. The guy the first met with a lot of anticipation fell far short of my expectations. But that didn't last long. That guy captured Ares, persuaded Heracles. And he brought Pandora to his side. And now, he survived Poseidon. A series of unbelievable events. That wasn't all. All this fighting moved as if it were a picture that guy had drawn. I was no exception, so I just thought he was a guy with a crazy head. But that wasn't it. It's not that he's talented. The concentration of magic power, which was incomparable to when we first met. In that short time, the guy had changed completely. He was already a complete guy. Hades was determined never to become an enemy of Kim Yuan. That's when the earth turned upside down once more. Kwang, Wujik, Zeus's body fell down like a meteor. Hades spotted Heracles staggering in the distance. That side is over too. Despite the burns from the electric shock all over his body, Heracles seemed relatively unscathed. On the other hand, Zeus was already riddled with wounds all over his body. He was unconscious and no longer moving. Heracles. After the first Gigantomachy, Heracles had stopped his activities. As such, his ranking was on par with the three gods, but not higher. But why? 1,000 years was enough time to completely change the Heracles that Hades knew. Without any proper items, he has such skills. That guy is also a monster. Even without Zeus or Poseidon, the future of Olympus was not so bleak. Now that everything has been overturned, it's time to start over. That's when it happened. Waak! The sky opens wide. The dark clouds that had been covering it cleared away, and a bright light poured down from above. They're here. Yuan looked up. The guild that was most interested in this fight. Also, the guild with the deepest justification for intervening in this fight. Kahahehe. Led by dozens of white horses, several huge ships descended to the ground. Asgard. They knew Olympus was broken. In addition, Asgard was a place that was aware of the existence of the second gigantomachy and was on guard. Is this the end? Yu-1 looked at Poseidon's face. A face that had turned white. Their appearance meant only one thing to Poseidon. I'll be locked up again. A little later than expected, Poseidon had been on the rampage for a while. Asgard never gives freedom to a prisoner they have released once. It was only natural for Asgard to take Poseidon back now that the battle was over. Puck. Poseidon gritted his teeth. In the end, he failed to obtain either the lightning or the stone of the sea. The one who caught Zeus was Hercules. He had not been able to take advantage of this excellent opportunity to get out of prison. I can't keep going like this. He had to buy some time. Poseidon moved his trident carefully. He needed one powerful strike to escape this place. Wang. Magical power gathered at the tip of the spear. The horses descending to the ground cried out at the flow of that magical power and the hostility it contained. Kihihihing. Dozens of white horses. Poseidon's spearhead moved towards the Valkyries. Puwaik. Hundreds of thousands of tons of water rose up the tip of the spear. The formation was disrupted. Yes, Poseidon got on the water. He had bought some time, however brief. That brief moment was enough for him to get away. Jjoa. Poseidon's body, which had gotten on the water, slid. The distance increased in an instant. Just as Poseidon was about to escape from Asgard's clutches. Where do you think you're going? Bam! A blue thunderbolt exploded over Poseidon's head. Kwang. Cuck. Poseidon's body staggered from the shock to his head. The water that had been moving with his magical power scattered, and Poseidon's body fell forward pathetically. Eugene, who had been watching this from afar, sighed. There was no way he could escape. Asgard was not a fool. Although he was a sinner, his opponent was Poseidon, one of the three gods. To catch such a Poseidon, they could not have sent only Valkyrie troops. Of course, they would have sent a ranker of equal rank. Eugene looked at the man who had just slammed Poseidon's head down. But I never thought Thor would come. Golden hair, a sharp jawline with a short beard connected to the sideburns. A high ranker of Asgard holding Mjolnir in one hand. Odin's son, Thor, had come here with the Valkyries. Thor is definitely a match for Poseidon. Their rankings are similar and the only difference was that Thor was fresh, unlike Poseidon, who was exhausted from the great battle. Thor subdued Poseidon in one breath and looked around. The battlefield is a mess. The battlefield was already transformed beyond recognition. It was as if the gigantomachy had taken place. Asgard's role here was to clean up the chaotic battlefield, summoning the sinner Poseidon, and securing the greater sinner, Zeus. Thor was in charge of both roles. Take good care of this guy. You never know when he'll try to get away again. Yes, it doesn't matter if Zeus' new troops don't survive. If they resist, ask Hercules and Hades for cooperation. I understand. And Thor and Eugene's eyes met as they scanned the battlefield. Are you Kim Yu-1? Chapter 185. So it's come to this. A self-deprecating voice flowed from the mouth of Zeus, who had fallen to the floor. Asgard, the strongest guild, no matter how much one struggled. Zeus had given up fighting them. Even for Olympus, Asgard was an unavoidable place. That's why he thought of Ragnarok. The power of the giants that would defeat Asgard. But in the end, he was lying on the ground, and Asgard had come here to capture him. But in the end, this was how it was. Pathetic, pathetic. Zeus's gaze turned to the sky. It was the place he had been just a short while ago. And from there, countless spears fell. Thud, thud, thud. Dozens of pure white spears pierced Zeus's body. He could feel all the magic power in his body draining away. There were dozens of items that restricted the magic power of a high ranker, so there was no way Zeus could escape, no matter how hard he tried. Heracles, who had been fighting him, stopped moving for a moment and looked at the Valkyries descending to the ground. Are you Heracles Nim? A female warrior with copper-colored skin approached. Heracles answered in a sharp voice to the leader of the Valkyries, who was clad in silver armor. This doesn't seem to be a matter for Asgard to get involved in. If you wish to dispose of Zeus, you may do so yourself. After all, this is a matter that has taken place within Olympus. This fight belonged to Olympus. The Valkyries, and Asgard, were clearly aware of that fact. That's why the first decision on how to deal with Zeus had to be Heracles. However, but if you are not going to kill him, I would like you to hand the prisoner over to us. For what reason? Because only we in Asgard can control a living Zeus. Heracles' eyebrows twitched. It wasn't wrong. Dead or alive, a living Zeus could always be a major threat to this tower. He had the power and the knowledge to do so. Whether to kill him or not is your choice, Heracles. At the Valkyrie's words, Heracles' gaze turned to Zeus, who had dozens of spears stuck in his body. What will you do? The battlefield was gradually being cleared. Poseidon was once again dragged away to Asgard by the Valkyries. Zeus's troops, who had been incapacitated by Heracles, returned to their original positions. The war was over. You've done a great job. Thor, who approached Yuan, smiled broadly with Mjolnir over his shoulder. His eyes were full of curiosity. It seemed that he had already heard quite a lot about Yuan. There's nothing good that comes from getting involved. Thor was Odin's son, a welcome face. Yuan had been on quite a few battlefields with him. But now was not the time to face him. I did what I had to do. There's no need for praise. You had to. What? Thor's gaze turned to Yuan's hand. Is it that, perhaps? Thunderbolt, an item that was like Zeus's symbol. Yuan didn't deny it. He nodded his head and met Thor's gaze, who then smiled broadly. Don't be so wary. Asgard isn't shameless enough to covet spoils of war that were rightfully taken. He knew, at least in Asgard, if nowhere else, they wouldn't covet the thunderbolt. As the saying goes, the water below is only as clear as the water above. In that sense, Asgard was the clearest water that Yuan trusted. However, he had a separate concern. The hourglass was created by Cronus and Odin together. Cronus had the ability to control time, but the hourglass was not an item that he could have created on his own. The difficulty of the item was simply too high for that. It won't be a problem just because I find out. His meeting with Odin had definitely been planned. Moreover, it was something that he couldn't avoid doing. The influence Odin had in this tower was too great for that. However, it's better to have as few variables as possible. It wasn't the time. Contact with Asgard could wait. For now, it was better to just pass by like this. I'm tired from fighting. I'd appreciate it if you could just get to the point. I'm tired from fighting, so I'd like to keep this brief. I'm just curious. I wonder who the player is that father is interested in. Father. Yuan's eyes narrowed. Odin, you shouldn't call that name so carelessly. Clench, creak. The strength in the hand on Yuan's shoulder increased. He had forgotten. He had been thinking about how he had called it too carelessly, but in Asgard, the name Odin was like a sanctuary. Do you understand? I'll keep it in mind. Good. You're smart, kid. Thud, thud. Thor patted Yuan's shoulder, which he had been holding, and lifted the corners of his mouth again. Soon after, he reached into his arms and pulled out a badge and handed it to him. This is from father. Take it. Yuan looked at the badge Thor handed him. It was a familiar pattern. A badge that looked like a large palace compressed into a golden glow. This is. He had only heard the name, but this was his first time receiving it. The symbol of the golden castle. A kind of pass that would allow him to enter Valhalla, the sanctuary. Why are you giving this to me? It's an invitation. An invitation. If you survive this war, father said he wanted to see you once. It was indeed a noteworthy event. After all, it was the collapse of Olympus, one of the giant guilds like Asgard. Furthermore, surviving a great war in which Zeus, a high ranker within the top 10, was involved was enough to completely overturn Yuan's evaluation, which had been known until now. You're going to come up soon anyway, right? Come up and visit me once. I'll treat you well. If it's a recruitment offer, I'm not interested. I just want to invite you as a guest. Politely. It would be impolite to continue to refuse after he had said so much. Above all, this way, he would be able to set the time to meet. Okay, Yuan received the badge and put it away. There was still a long way to go to reach Valhalla. At times like this, he was grateful for Odin's heavy behind. This is the second one. He recalled a similar item he had acquired. Diablo's horn. It was an item he had received after passing the 41st floor trial. Yuan had passed the 41st floor trial and promised to meet Diablo's avatar again. How can I use this again? The symbol of the golden castle was a kind of reward he had received for resolving the issue with Olympus and from Asgard. Since it wasn't a simple item, it was entirely up to Yuan how he would use it. Well, I'll see you again. Thor, his business concluded, turned around. Far in the distance, the Valkyries were escorting Poseidon. Friend, Clank. Thor, who was in charge of cleaning up the battlefield, walked towards the Valkyries like that. Yuan looked at Thor's broad back and looked at the symbol of the golden castle in his hand. Friend, it must have been a friendly expression from his point of view, but Yuan couldn't help but feel awkward. I'm hearing all sorts of things from Odin's son. Coming to the past, there really had been all sorts of strange things. Thinking so, Yuan put the badge in his inventory. The fall of Olympus spread throughout the tower faster than any means of transportation. The main story was the rebellion of Hades, Poseidon, and Heracles. The division of the three gods. Heracles, the bloodline of the king, who succeeded to the throne. Flesh and skin were added to the bones of the rumors, and another form was created, mixing truth and falsehood. Such is the division of the three gods being Asgard's plan. Or that Heracles was not actually Zeus's son. Or even that all of this was actually another one of Zeus's schemes. Regardless of such rumors, Olympus quickly found stability. So, in the end, you let him live. Yuan sat across from Heracles with a cup of tea. The place was a small house on the 32nd floor where the war had taken place. It was far from the battlefield, a place untouched by the aftermath of the fight. A small and shabby place like the cabin where Heracles originally stayed. That was why Heracles had chosen this place as a temporary shelter. Yeah, that's what happened. I guess you couldn't kill him. I don't know, maybe I didn't have enough time to make up my mind. Or maybe it's because we're still brothers. I couldn't make a choice, so I just took him with me. It must have been a difficult choice to make in an instant. A father who ordered him to kill his mother. To Hercules, who was deeply attached to his mother Alcmene, he must have been an unparalleled enemy. However, Zeus had been a father to Hercules for thousands of years. It couldn't have been easy to make a choice in that short amount of time. That's like you. What? Indecisive. Hercules let out a laugh at Yuan's words. I'm a giant killer. I killed 1,000,000 giants. Indecisive, that's not like me. So, was it okay? Hercules' eyes widened. Was it okay? Yuan added to Hercules, who did not answer for a moment. I'm asking if you felt better as you continued to kill giants. Better? Probably not. The first time I saw you, you didn't look like that. How did I look? You looked like you wanted to finish it all quickly and escape from this hell. Alcmene's revenge. It was a task that Hercules had to accomplish without fail. However, in the process, Hercules continued to deteriorate. Gigantomachy was not a simple war. It was also a stage for the completion of the giant killer. What are you talking about? If it wasn't a war, would you have moved? At Yuan's question, Hercules recalled himself when he was called the giant killer. His eyes were bloodshot at that time. A desire for revenge against Alcmene. Hostility towards the giants. Perhaps it was because the stage called battlefield was set up that he swung his fists at any giant without distinguishing between water and fire. Was I being made even then? War. Hercules was able to gain legitimacy in it. This fight is not simply revenge. The giants are enemies of Olympus, and they are beings who will one day cause greater calamities to the tower. That's why Hercules was able to swing his fists at the giants. Revenge could finally be put into practice. Zeus used gigantomachy to use Hercules as a tool. Do you regret it, not killing Zeus? A little. Then go find him now. Maybe even now, Asgard will hand over Zeus's neck to you. No, an old man who has already lost his strength, dreams, and future. Hercules no longer called Zeus his father. The last remaining foolishness between father and son. Hercules finally cut it off inside. I want to end it here. Just up to here. Zeus has lost everything. If revenge is not complete unless he dies, it is already a success. I'm not going to think about that anymore. I'm too tired for that. Really? Yuan examined Hercules' expression. He wasn't as expressive as Son Goku. But even so, after watching him for a long time, I could tell to some extent what he was thinking. A complicated face, but at least there was a little relief mixed in among them. That's enough, whether Zeus lives or dies. Yuan didn't really care about that. What mattered was Hercules' heart. Yuan wanted him to get rid of the burden he was carrying inside as much as possible. He was, after all, his friend. What about you? What are you going to do now? Hercules recalled that Yuan had been fighting Olympus for quite a long time after entering the tower. The long battle was over. I wondered if this tower might shake again in the future, depending on Yuan's actions. I should meet the old man first. Old man, brother Hephaestus. Yeah, Yuan briefly recalled the thunderbolt he had put in his inventory. I have collected all 3 pieces. At the end of the discussion about breaking Olympus, Hephaestus suddenly said something. If you collect all the pieces, be sure to bring them to me. Yuan still couldn't forget the look in Hephaestus' eyes at that time. Greed and ambition as a blacksmith. It was the first time Yuan had seen such fiery eyes. I promised, even though it's not Hephaestus of this era. I'll make you the best item. With the old man and me. It was time to keep that promise, in this era. Chapter 186. The lowest part of the tower. First floor. It was a familiar place that he visited once in a while, but today, the atmosphere felt very different. It's quiet. The usually bustling street was extremely deserted. There were no merchants or people drinking. Yu-won asked a passerby the reason. Didn't you hear? The management bureau has been paralyzed. Olympus, who was in charge of security, has gone to shit, so we can only look out for ourselves. Asgard is still sending people, but we need to be careful for the time being. At least those bastards are gone, though. After asking a few people, he got similar answers. The absence of the management bureau. Since the city was under Olympus's management, the criminals of the tower heard the news and came down to the first floor. What a mess. Olympus's absence affected the entire tower. Like how foxes would become kings of a mountain without tigers, many criminals came down to the first floor to loot empty houses. This chaos probably wouldn't last long. After all, a new king would appear on the mountain without a tiger. But at least this street will be quiet for the time being. Yu-won walked through the deserted street towards the forge. It was quiet in the forge for the first time in a while. Normally, he would at least hear the sound of hammering. Creak. The door wasn't locked. Yu-won entered the forge. A staircase led to the basement. It was still warm, but the forge wasn't as hot as usual. Are you not here? He could feel someone's presence. Still, Yu-won asked just in case Hephaestus got startled. And then, knock before you come in, you punk. A reply came from downstairs. What was going on? He could understand taking a break from hammering, but he hated it when the forge cooled down. Yu-won went down the stairs, knocked on the wall with the back of his hand, and said. I did. I knocked. Damn it. Hephaestus was sitting on a chair. It was a chair he sometimes used to rest while hammering, but there were 2 bottles of alcohol rolling around next to him instead of a hammer. Alcohol. It was something he never drank. You don't get drunk easily, so why are you drinking that? Rankers drank special alcohol. It was like poison. For rankers who had enhanced physical abilities due to their stats and didn't get drunk easily, they needed to drink something like that to get drunk. However, the alcohol that Hephaestus was drinking was low-proof alcohol that low-level players could easily obtain. Even if you want to get drunk, you have to be able to get your hands on that kind of alcohol. Then why are you drinking? My house is a mess, so I can at least enjoy this much. House. Yu-won had no choice but to stop at those words. No matter how he ran away, Olympus was Hephaestus' hometown. Olympus had fallen. Because of that, Hephaestus was no longer a fugitive, but he couldn't help but feel empty. Hephaestus placed the empty bottle on the floor. Then he waved his hand at Yu-won, who was standing in front of him. Don't make that face. I'm not blaming you. Rather, you did well. Hephaestus got up from his seat. His back, which had been hunched over for a moment, straightened up again. A blacksmith must melt down useless iron and reforge it. That's the only way it can serve its purpose. It was a blacksmith-like analogy. The visible sadness did not last long. He would probably need a long time to sort things out, but he would overcome it. Yu-won had already witnessed such a sight. So, what? You're not here to comfort me. I have a present. A present. Yu-won reached into his inventory. Hephaestus looked puzzled, and soon, the dark smithy lit up as if a fire had been lit. Snap. What the? Hephaestus' eyes widened as if he had just realized something. Surely this isn't lightning. A round, circular bead. It was a simple shape, but Hephaestus recognized it as lightning as soon as he saw it. Hephaestus was the one who had originally created lightning, so it was natural. The shape was a little different at first, but Hephaestus was not an ordinary blacksmith who couldn't recognize the items he had created. You can see, can't you? Why do you have that? I participated in the war too. No, even so, he knew that Yu-won had participated in the war. Originally, he had been at war with Olympus for a long time. Naturally, he thought that Yu-won would be at the center of it. However, Yu-won being at the center of the war and him obtaining the Thunderbolt were completely separate issues. The Thunderbolt was an item that was almost like a symbol of Zeus. Naturally, it was also the most valuable item that could be obtained as spoils of war. But Yu-won has such an item. If the Thunderbolt wasn't just rolling around on the floor, that meant that Yu-won had acquired the item himself. I will drag them down. From up there, to the ground. Yu-won's answer to the question of what he would do to Olympus someday. It was the same statement, but as time passed and he thought about it, the statement felt new again. So, were those words all true? At that time, he thought it was just an interesting statement from a talented rookie who didn't know the ways of the world. He couldn't just let his words go by like this. So, This is my gift. Not just this one. Jeek. Yuan took off the black glove he was wearing. Following that, he took off the armor he was wearing and placed it on the floor. Thud. 3 items were placed on the floor. The thunderbolt, the triangle, and the quina, all items that Hephaestus had made himself. And the moment they gathered in one place. This. What comes to mind when you see it? Did you gather them all knowing? Hephaestus had made all 3 of these items. And the core material of those items. 3 stones that were similar but different. Hephaestus had long hoped for the day when they would all be gathered in one place. What the hell are you? What are you doing? Isn't that a bit of a late question? There's nothing I can say to answer it. But does this make sense? Why wouldn't it? That's not important right now. Shrugging his shoulders and speaking naturally, Hephaestus lost himself in thought as he looked at Yuan and the 3 items on the floor alternately. It's not important. Yes, it wasn't wrong. Normally, he would have nitpicked him, but right now he wasn't interested in that. Can you make it? A question with the subject omitted. However, Hephaestus realized what Yuan wanted from that question. Really anything. The treasure before his eyes. There was no way Yuan didn't know its value. If he used these, something great would definitely come out. Even if he spent 3 days and nights contemplating what item to create, it wouldn't be enough. No, it might fail. I might end up throwing all of this away. The item itself might be ruined. That was why, even if he was greedy as a blacksmith, it was a task that he couldn't just ask for since the other person was already holding the item. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter, Yuan answered without hesitation. Do whatever you want with it, sir. Enjoy yourself. Hephaestus, pupils dilated. It was a familiar situation. That's how you'll create the best item. The guy who immediately came to him to ask for his service after obtaining the black divine stone. Just like how he trusted him even though it was their first time meeting, Yuan once again entrusted Hephaestus with the 3 items. There were no demands for the item's effects or form. Just do whatever he wanted with it. He asked him to enjoy himself, that was all. But this is for free. Heh, heh, Hephaestus burst into laughter. Laughter that came out of bewilderment and joy. His mind was still complicated, but the sweat on his palms was unbearable. A wish that he had always dreamed of like a fantasy in his head had appeared before his eyes. The lightning bolt that was in Zeus' hands, and the 2 stones that resembled it, were now placed right in front of him. Oh yeah, good, I feel like I should give you points instead, so I won't accept that. The tone of his voice was getting higher. Just a moment ago, he was shaken by Olympus' downfall, but he had found his world again. It's going to take some time. Do whatever you want to do in the meantime. You can go up the tower, or you can rest for a while. Swish, Hephaestus immediately rolled up his sleeves. I can't say for sure how long it'll take. But I promise you this. Yuan, who made eye contact with Hephaestus, felt the cold workshop suddenly start to heat up. I will create the best item for you, even if it means burning my soul. Quang, the flames in the workshop reignited. Yuan quickly turned invisible. It seemed that nothing else entered Hephaestus's eyes except for his work. He immediately began working after using magic to remove any trace of a hangover. Yuan quietly left the workshop, combining 3 items into one. It probably wouldn't be an easy task. Maybe he'll fail. It would be a shame if that happened. Thunderbolt, quina, and triangle. They were all famous items throughout the tower. His heart ached at the thought. But still, the only person he could trust was Hephaestus. Well, there's nothing I can do about it if that happens. There were countless items. Items that could compare to Thunderbolt were rare, but it wasn't impossible to get them. It was a gamble, but it was a gamble worth taking. How long will it take? At the shortest, a month. It could take years at the longest. The 3 items currently took up a large portion of Yuan's combat power. Without them, his plans would have to be postponed for the time being. For now, I have no choice but to climb the tower again. A short break. With the destruction of Olympus, he had no choice but to rest for a while and climb the tower slowly. Right now, it was time for others to exert their strength rather than him. That guy. As he walked up the stairs, Yuan thought of Son Goku, who he had parted ways with on the 40th floor, Ares' temple. I wonder how he's doing. Son Goku had nothing to do in this destruction of Olympus. His role ended by helping in the fight against Athena. He, the 12th clone, hadn't been much help in the fight against Zeus, and there was something more important than helping in the fight. That was why Yuan parted ways with Son Goku on the 40th floor. Yuan, who didn't have the authority of the tower, couldn't go up and down the upper floors of the tower, so he had no choice but to ask Son Goku, his clone, to do what was necessary. I'll see you soon. Thud. 50th floor. Jukchian Dizong, the world where Son Goku's ontology was sealed. Yuan began climbing the tower again, heading towards that world. That damn friend. Chapter 187. Chapter 187. Leveling with the gods. 50th floor. A prosperous and beautiful world where the sky and the earth were connected. It was early in the peaceful dawn, in the mountains where the sun was just rising. Sun Wukong, who had been lying on a flat rock and yawning, looked up at the clouds. He's coming fast. The size of the cloud that entered Sun Wukong's eyes grew rapidly. The cloud was gradually approaching. In Sun Wukong's fire eyes golden jing, another image of himself riding on the cloud was reflected. That guy is the 14th. It had taken a lot of effort to find him. But it turned out that he was staying on the 50th floor, not anywhere else. He's a willful guy. Oh, he's coming out. Sun Wukong slapped his mouth at the words that came out of his mouth. He managed to overcome the annoyance and got up. Did you call me? Another Sun Wukong was standing on the cloud that had come close to him. When did I call you? Isn't it dangerous, calling me like this? What if the guys above find out? Is the personality of each clone slightly different? Even though it was the same situation, the clone in front of him had a slightly different idea than Sun Wukong, the 12th clone. Why are you worried about something like that? If there's a problem, I'll just fight. The 14th Sun Wukong frowned at the words of the 12th Sun Wukong. Without the main body, do you think that's possible? It must be impossible. Damn it, no matter how ignorant we are, there's a limit. What nonsense. That's why I called you guys. You guys. It was plural, not singular. A question mark appeared on the 14th Sun Wukong's face. Then, whoosh, the fire eyes golden jing of the two men reacted. This is the fourth one. Swish, of the rocks scattered around, two changed their appearance. Two people with fire eyes golden jing. Two more clones appeared. The 6th and the 11th. The 12th Sun Wukong. He pointed to the newly arrived Sun Wukongs. The 14th. The four clones gathered. If the heaven knew, it would be terrified. Those who guarded the heavenly court would not be very happy to see the clones gathered in one place. Sun Wukong gathered the clones in one place, knowing that. Gather all the clones by the time I go up. It'll be much easier for you, who have the somersault cloud and can go up and down the tower. Yuan had only reached the 42nd floor. Moreover, he only had half of the fire eyes golden jing. The role of gathering the clones was not Yuan's, but his own clones. The heavenly court will be annoyed, but nevertheless, there was a corner of his mind that believed. If that guy comes up. If I go up to the 50th floor. The four Sun Wukongs, they all shared each other's memories through the fire eyes golden jing, and at this moment, they all thought of one person. Then, we save Sun Wukong. Then, we rescue the main body. From the 40th floor onwards, the tests became more difficult. The level of the players was also quite high, and as the difficulty increased, the time it took to take the test was bound to increase. Yuan took 2 tests. The 42nd and 43rd floors. Of course, he passed all the tests. There's no point in taking any more tests. The test supervisor who took the test was amazed. Yuan did not take the test to the administrator. The schedule was not that tight, and there was no reason to climb the tower in a hurry. Even if I reach the 50th floor, it's meaningless if the clones don't gather. At this point, it was impossible to know exactly how many clones there were. However, considering that the Sun Wukong he had met was the 12th, it meant that there were at least 12 clones. On top of that, considering that the Sun Ogong I met was the 12th, that meant there were at least 12 or more doppelgangers. The conversation of the guys who were grumbling towards me stopped. Furthermore, since I had to wait for the production of the item, there was no reason to move hastily. Therefore, Yuan leisurely climbed the tower. For someone, it would be something they would have to risk their life and give it their all, but for Yuan, that time itself was a kind of break. A path he had already walked once. It wasn't hard to walk it again, and the difficulty of the test wasn't that high either. Welcome to the 44th floor. The air was desolate. The air was hazy as if it was filled with dust and the sky was ambiguously bright, whether it was night or day. A pungent smell. The 44th floor. Yuan frowned as he stepped onto the 44th floor. It was the second time he had come here. Even before the regression, he hadn't come back to this floor after the first time he climbed the tower. There was one reason for that. This place is worse than hell. The world of the 42nd floor, hell, might not have been a good place to live, but it wasn't the most dangerous world. However, this 44th floor, which was always compared to hell, was in much worse condition than the 42nd floor, at least in terms of law and order. A world ruled by the Samgyas. The Samgyas, who had been given the right to rule by the administrator, neglected this world in the name of freedom. Freedom. It was a beautiful and romantic word. But the result wasn't so good. Freedom without law had brought about the worst results in the world of the 44th floor. Freedom is the same as a lawless zone. It was a world that was considerably smaller compared to the other worlds. This world didn't have anything called an administration bureau. Here, power was the law and the rule. Og! A scream could be heard from afar. It had started as soon as he arrived. Isn't this kid a jackpot? Hey, don't kill him yet. Take his points first. I know, Inma, like I've done it once or twice. An unpleasant conversation continued. Yu-1 ignored their conversation. In other places, it might have been different, but in this world, it was impossible to get involved in things like this every time. Murder, robbery, violence. These sharp and unpleasant words were nothing more than everyday life in this world. It started. Clack, clack. Yu-1 walked through the deserted street. Old and worn-out buildings. It was hard to find people on the street, but he could feel gazes. Hey, isn't that kid new? His clothes look clean. Look at his confident steps. Let's take a closer look. To see if he's an escort or not. Are there any other groups, by any chance? Gazes peeking at him from between the buildings. It was just like when he had first entered the first floor. A pack of jackals looking to rip off new players. Their actions weren't that different from theirs. The difference was that they were much bigger in size compared to jackals. The size of the criminal groups on the 44th floor is comparable to that of a mid-sized guild. Of course, not all of them belong to one group. In the first place, it was almost impossible for violent criminals to unite into one group. However, even though they were scattered like dots, they would become one again when necessary. That was what was scary. The cohesion created in the name of freedom and lawlessness. And the greater, invisible power that had created that cohesion. Should we just let him go? He seems strong. Yeah, we should. If he's connected to a large guild, it'll be a pain in the ass. Things have been chaotic lately anyway. Yuan's brows narrowed at the conversation about him. Just let him go. This was unexpected. I thought I had them. Yuan had hoped that there would be someone who would naturally attack him like this. But unlike the jackals, these guys had a good nose. The eyes that searched for pushovers were amazing, as expected of guys who had done a lot of robbing. Yu-1 sighed inwardly. He couldn't do anything about this. It might be a bit artificial, but whatever. Yuan's body, which had been walking through the deserted street, turned to the side. The chatter of the men who had been surrounding him stopped. Yuan looked at them squarely. Creak. The footsteps that had changed direction moved. Between the buildings. As Yuan entered the secluded alleyway that was their hideout, the men who had been choosing their prey were taken aback. What, is he coming this way? What do we do? Should we just catch him? Or run away? Damn it, run away from what? Why should we? As they hesitated, the distance quickly narrowed. Yuan had entered the alleyway. An empty street. Yuan stepped into the middle of it and opened his mouth. Let me just ask you one thing. There was no answer. Instead, the men huddled together and kept their mouths shut. A few of the men slowly drew their swords. They were the ones who had chosen to fight rather than hide. Swish. Let's talk. Yuan turned his head and met the eyes of one of the men. At that moment, spot, a sharp line appeared in front of Yuan's neck. Clang, a solid thud. The man who had revealed his hidden body and swung his short sword stepped back with a bewildered face. What, when? He was asking when he had used his skill. Yuan stroked his neck with his hand. Is this guy just now coming up to the 44th floor? He's so slow. He hadn't used any special skill. The reason the sword hadn't cut in was simply the difference in stats. A stamina stat over 100. It was an excessive stat for a player on the 44th floor. It wouldn't have worked even if he had used a powerful skill that consumed magic power, let alone a sword that he had swung so clumsily. There was no reason why he hadn't dodged the sword. Simply because, there was no need to block it. Thud, thud. Judging that they couldn't help but appear with the appearance of one person, the rest of the party appeared around them. They blocked both sides of the alleyway and surrounded them all the way up to the top of the building. The man who had first swung his sword at Yuan opened his mouth at the sight of the party blocking all sides. Be careful, everyone, that bastard uses strange skills. He said that, but he didn't seem to be that careful. Did he believe in numbers? His face was full of arrogance and his voice was full of confidence. Perhaps there were players among the party who were not on the 44th floor, but on a higher level. Careful of what? A guy who just came up. That bastard's not even a ranker, what can he do? From what I can tell, he looks like he has something to eat. The men chattered around Yuan. Yuan looked at the number of men filling the alleyway. It's a little over 30. It's about the size of a small guild. This was the size of a small guild. It didn't seem to have a clear hierarchy, but it was quite large for a group that could be found on the 44th floor. It seemed that it wasn't a coincidence that they had seen Yuan at first and let him go. With this size, they must have been quite experienced, and they must have had some ability to read people. Good. The bigger the scale, the better. From now on, what he was going to do needed to be known by as many people as possible. Yuan raised both hands and said, "I'm not here to fight, I'm here to ask you something." There was no need to take out his weapon. Even if he fought, he couldn't kill them. From now on, they had to become his loyal messengers who would spread his words. I heard that one of the 3 artifact is here. The 3 artifact, the 3 items sought by the 3 high rankers, including Susano, the 3 nobles. As the item was mentioned from Yuan's mouth, the atmosphere that had been murderous just a moment ago became stiff. Do you happen to know anything? The bait had been cast. The bait to catch the big fish. Chapter 188. UGHH. Uvik, UUP. People were scattered all over the alleyway. Someone was holding their broken leg, while someone else was vomiting. Some seemed to have completely lost consciousness, their eyes rolling back in their heads. Was that kid a ranker? He's unlucky, he had to run into. Those who were relatively unharmed hurriedly took out bandages and herbs from their inventory to treat their wounds. Fortunately, there were no fatalities. That was a blessing in disguise. Despite the overwhelming difference, the damage was only this much. Just then, one of the group who had just bandaged their wounds spoke up with a pale face. I remember that kid's face. Face, is he a famous ranker? No, he's not a ranker. Then, he hesitated for a moment before answering, recalling a memory that was now quite old. It's Kim Yu-won. Kim Yu-won, is he the winner of the last Muram competition? The winner of the Muram competition. The strongest player. And the sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult. All 3 were titles that preceded Kim Yu-won's name. And as such, even though they were players from the lower floors, the players from the upper floors acknowledged his skill. Of course, even so, this much. Perhaps Kim Yu-won already possessed the skills of a ranker. It was a rumor that was spreading openly. Zheqian had already defeated a ranker who was a test supervisor on the 50th floor, and similar cases could often be found among the top-ranking high rankers. And Kim Yu-won had broken all the records of such high rankers, so it was a natural guess. But a guess was just a guess. He couldn't help but feel disappointed in the skill he had seen with his own eyes. He'll be difficult to touch if he's backed by the Heavenly Demon Cult. As his colleague's eyes lit up while bandaging him, the other group asked. Do you want it? The man, whose eyes were gleaming, nodded his head. Of course he would want it. The Samshin sword, a treasure of the ages that even high rankers would be eager to get their hands on. The moment he got his hands on it, he would be able to become a ranker with the power of the item. And once he became a ranker, the power of the Samshin sword would become an even greater asset. That kid definitely said he was looking for the Samshin sword. Kim Yu-won is probably better informed than most rankers. The original copy that the Heavenly Demon Cult got their hands on. If I had that. The conversation soon focused on the Samshin sword. Someone was already talking as if the Samshin sword was already theirs. But that didn't last long. How can we do it ourselves? At someone's words, the conversation cooled down like cold water had been poured over it. Their colleagues were scattered on the floor. All of this was the result of one Kim Yu-won. After a brief silence, it'll be difficult for us, but... Someone spoke in a grim voice. There are plenty of places that are after the Samshin sword. 12 points. Breakfast is separate. The innkeeper handed over a nightgown to change into and a key with the room number written on it. Yu-won entered the room he had chosen and looked around. Is this the most expensive room in this town? The most expensive room was 12 points. He knew that the prices on the 44th floor were cheap, but it was still amazing. It was a spacious room of about 30 square meters with fairly clean facilities. It was a steal for the price. The fact that the prices were low in places with poor security and location was the same in Yu-won's world and here. Plop. Yu-won sat down on the sofa. He wasn't very comfortable. There was no immediate danger, but this was a place where you never knew when a knife would come flying at you. One Samshin sword has been released so far. The Samgwajaja are after too. Swish. Yu-Won reached into his inventory. A cheap-feeling sword was in his hand. He took out the sword along with its crude red scabbard, and the air in the room felt colder. And here's one more. The sword of Kusanagi. A type of demonic sword, it was a relic of Susanoo that the Samgyas were after. They'd be pissed if the Samgyas found out. The Yata no Kagami, 8 shaku curved jewel that Amaterasu possessed. Amaterasu, who knew the power of the Samshinki, searched every corner of the tower for Susanoo's relics and other Samshinki. The same went for Tsukuyomi, another member of the Samgyas. If they were to find out that Yu-Won had the sword of Kusanagi, they would stop at nothing to find him. Wow, whoa, just then, Dan-ah, who had been sleeping in Yu-Won's arms, suddenly raised her head. She was interested in the sword of Kusanagi. No, you can't. Swish. Yu-Won quickly moved the sword of Kusanagi away from Dan-ah. Now I'm scared that you'll just eat it if I look away for a second. Ah bah, bah bah bah. It's no use whining. The sword of Kusanagi was an important item. It wasn't an item that Yu-Won was particularly compatible with, as it was a demonic sword, but even if he didn't use it, there were places where it could be useful. Wah! Dan-ah's cheeks puffed up. She seemed very upset. Of course, no child could calmly accept having their delicious snack taken away from them. It was only natural to be disappointed. Yu-Won chuckled as he looked at Dan-ah's puffed up cheeks. It seemed like he needed to appease her. Where I used to live, there was this thing called the marshmallow experiment. Wah! Dan-ah tilted her head as if to ask what that was. Yu-Won continued speaking. They would give you a delicious snack, and if you didn't eat it until I came back from doing something, they would give you 2 snacks. It was a fairly well-known experiment. An experiment that gave 2 snacks as a reward for waiting. And the result was that those who succeeded in waiting went on to become successful in the future, or so the story went. Yu-Won didn't necessarily believe in the theory, as it was just an experiment. However, the situation was just like that experiment. So just wait a little bit. Yu-Won put the sword of Kusanagi, which he had taken out for a moment, back into his inventory and said. Then I'll give you a snack that's much bigger than this. Yu-Won spent his time on the 44th floor. He had temporarily put climbing the tower on hold. He had thrown out the bait, so now it was time to wait for it to bite. Did you hear that? They say Kim Yu-Won is looking for the Samshinki. The Samshinki? Why here, he must have heard some information. Is he usually this crazy? Crazy? In this shitty neighborhood? Is this the start of a treasure hunt? Yu-Won, who had come out into the street, listened intently to the rumors. He was listening to the conversations of the players who were drinking in the pub. Yu-Won, who had been drinking a beer and eating ham to relieve his boredom, felt someone's gaze on him. Here we go again. It had been 10 days since he had arrived on the 44th floor. Rumors had spread quickly, and during that time, Yu-Won had been steadily searching for the Samshinki. Treasure hunting. The story coming from the table next to him was spot on. While we're at it, let me just ask you one thing. Clank. Yu-Won placed the beer he had been drinking on the table. The magic power that had suddenly filled the pub. Of the 6 tables, 4 of them were glaring at Yu-Won with hostility. They say the Samshinki is here. Do any of you know anything about it? That's what we want to ask you. Creak. One of them got up from his seat. That was the beginning. Clang, clank. Players drew their weapons and prepared their skills. Among them was a rancor. Where did you hear that it's here? You don't know, do you? Then we have nothing to say. Yu-Won picked up the glass he had put down for a moment. Just go drink your alcohol. Enjoy yourselves. It wasn't a very pleasant place. Yu-Won drank alone in this place where swords and spears were pointed at him. His relaxed attitude seemed to surprise them, and the rapid movements around him came to a halt. But that didn't last long. Grab him first, quickly. The pub erupted in chaos. Boom, clang, a hole was punched in the ceiling. Starting with the player whose head was stuck in the ceiling, Yu-Won began to dance. Kwa Jik, Hua Uhk. Boong. Yu-Won grabbed his opponent's body and wielded it like a weapon. In the narrow tavern, a human body became quite a threatening weapon. Hua Uhk. Players fell one after another in an instant. Among them, a sharp spear flew towards Yu-Won. Kwa Jik. Jjing. The floor of the tavern sank along with the table. Yu-Won, who had moved to avoid the spear, looked at the owner of the spear. Bright yellow hair that was pulled up tightly with wax. His face looked like a punk's, but the magical power he exuded was real. A rancor, huh? After a while of dealing with small fries, a decent guy finally showed up. The size of the fish caught in the bait had gotten bigger. It was a slower response than he expected, but it wasn't a bad situation. The ranker, who had retrieved his spear, opened his mouth after watching what Yuan had done for a moment. Your skills aren't bad, just as I've heard. That's quite presumptuous of you to say. At his unrestrained words, the guy's forehead twitched. A little kid who doesn't even know what's above him. His face distorted with anger. He didn't seem to be a very patient guy. Strength entered his hand that was holding the spear. Now that he was face to face with the ranker, Yuan was thinking about something else. Should I kill him or spare him? If he let him live, more fish would probably follow. Then it would be right to spare him. Even though he didn't really want to. He's just not my type. His face and expression were like a punk's. It had been a long time since he had met someone he disliked this much for no reason. Boong, qua dad duck. The tip of the wielded spear grazed the wall of the tavern. The building shook, and others moved far away to get out of range of the spear. What are you just sitting there for? Thinking. At Yuan's answer, the wrinkles on the ranker's forehead deepened. Thinking, what to do with you? He didn't think for long. The spear pierced the air several times. Yuan's lips curled up as he turned his head slightly. I've decided. What? Ku Duke. Magical power flowed into Yuan's arm. Giant strength enters your arm. Partial gigantification. It was a method he hadn't used much since he had acquired full gigantification. But right now, this was enough. Swish. The spear stopped abruptly in the air. The ranker's eyes widened at the spear that didn't budge an inch. What kind of power is this? Boong. His vision went dark. Something approached him and filled his field of vision. That was the end. Juk. His vision spun, and his consciousness faded away. At the last moment, he had a hunch that this was his end. Thud. The tavern went silent at the sight of the ranker collapsed on the floor. But only for a moment. Crunch. The players gathered in the tavern began to step back one by one. What the hell? Let's go. I told you we shouldn't have come. The players whose bodies were intact chose to run away. Since the ranker they had come with had fallen, they judged that they no longer had a chance of winning. Yuan didn't chase after them. Yuan, who was suddenly left alone, looked at the wreckage of the broken table. This place is a mess. As he turned his head, Yuan's eyes fell upon a man who had entered the tavern without him noticing. Shall we move and talk? There's no need to go that far. The man who met his gaze shook his head. A middle-aged man with short, sporty black hair and deep wrinkles. He had come into the tavern in the middle of the fight and had been watching for a while. He's finally taken the bait. The biggest fish on the 44th floor that had taken Yuan's bait. Amaterasu. A giant whale of a fish shook Yuan's fishing rod. Chapter 189. Yuan sat down on a half-broken chair that was lying on the floor. Amaterasu did the same. The two of them sat across from each other on uncomfortable chairs, with no table in between. There were corpses scattered on the floor. Amaterasu, rank 52, the owner of the Yasukani no Magatama. Amaterasu was the center of the three demons. They didn't have a guild leader since they weren't a proper guild, but everyone who knew the three demons thought of Amaterasu as their leader. There were many rumors about Amaterasu. Some said he was a young man, while others said he was an old man. There was no truth to any of the countless rumors that spread. Because he never showed his true face. I don't think I need to tell you why I came to you. Is it because of the three divine treasures? Yes. Amaterasu asked without beating around the bush. Where is the Yata no Kagami? He seemed quite impatient. One of the three divine treasures, the Yasukani no Magatama, was in his possession, and the other, the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, was in Suzano's possession. So now, only one of the three divine treasures remained. Amaterasu was desperately trying to suppress his rising magical energy and attempt a conversation first. However, I don't know. At Yuan's reply, Amaterasu's magical energy finally started to leak out. Rumble, rumble, swoosh. The building of the tavern shook to its core, and the air became hot. Amaterasu was a high ranker in this tower who was second to none when it came to fire attribute magic. Naturally, when his magical energy was released, Yuan felt suffocated. It's suffocating. Amaterasu still wasn't threatening Yuan in particular. This was just a change that occurred because of his changing mood. It felt like looking down into hot lava. It was suffocating because he knew its depth and danger. You don't know. I'm looking for it because I don't know. Would I be here if I knew? Amaterasu thought for a moment before nodding his head. I suppose so. Is that all you came for? No, there's more. How did you know that the three divine treasures were here? What's your source? It was a reward for clearing the 43rd floor. The source is the administrator. The information is accurate. The administrator. His black eyebrows twitched. He had been trying to determine whether the information was true or not, but it was difficult to tell from this. The administrator. If that was true, he didn't need to verify the accuracy of the information. But still, I didn't think you'd tell me so easily. You should know more about the 3 divine treasures than anyone else. Do you know who I am? Yes, Amaterasu, the high ranker of the 3 demons who possesses one of the 3 divine treasures. You have a good eye. You don't show your face, do you? That face isn't your real one. Amaterasu was a ranker wrapped in a veil. But thinking about it differently, that veil was like Amaterasu's face. I heard you won your fight against Ares. It seems it's true. The fight between Yuan and Ares was hushed up even in Olympus. Olympus didn't need to announce that a high ranker in their guild had been defeated by a player, so they tried to keep it a secret as much as possible. However, since there were more than 1 or 2 people present, guilds with a certain level of information power already knew about it. Well, that's good. The better you are, the easier it will be to find the 3 divine treasures. If I find them, are you going to try to take them? Take them, they were ours from the beginning. You've never even touched them, yet you're already acting like the owner. If you have any complaints, speak with your strength. Isn't that the rule of this world? The 3 demons' method was always the same. Freedom. To them, freedom was the logic of power, and to overcome that, they needed greater power. But that's strange. Amaterasu tilted his head. Do you believe in the Cheon Masangyo? Or do you believe in your own insignificant strength that managed to defeat Ares? Whoosh. The air in the tavern became hot. Strangely, the tavern did not burn. Through the flames surrounding him, he could feel the gaze. You're a bit too cocky. Is she trying to assert her dominance? Amaterasu, who had gotten up from her seat, approached Yuan differently from before, as if threatening him. His breath, which had already felt suffocating, now tightened his throat even more. Due to the fire in the tavern, the air was oxidizing, and the flames seemed to be closing in on Yuan like a living being. A fight from the get-go. Yuan did not get up from his seat. This fight was not one of swords and fists. Sacred fire, resists, sun's mark. Fire shield, resists, sun's mark. Garment of the 4 spirits resists, sun's mark. Rumble. The skills possessed by Yuan and Amaterasu clashed. Instead of the pheasant, Yuan was wearing the garment of the 4 spirits, which increased his resistance to various attributes instead of just one. Resistance to fire was the area in which Yuan was most confident among all attributes. Instead of evading or bowing his head, Yuan fought head-on. Look at this guy. Amaterasu's eyebrows twitched. She knew he was quite skilled, but she didn't expect him to resist this much. Does he plan to resist to the end? Amaterasu's eyes flashed. It was now a matter of pride for her to back down. She would make him submit. The moment she made up her mind, Amaterasu's magic intensified. Crackle. As the heat in the tavern intensified, burn marks began to appear on Yuan's body. Resistance to sun's mark has failed. Status ailment. Burn starts. The pain of being burned by fire. Amaterasu's fire was as hot as it was said to be. Even though he hadn't taken out the divine item yet, it was enough to penetrate Yuan's skills. Squirm. The maple leaf in Yuan's arms squirmed, trying to get out. And it was then. Predator bares its teeth. Snap. Predator began to open its mouth. It seemed that it was gradually revealing itself because it judged that Yuan was in danger. No, you can't. Clench. Yuan grabbed Predator, who was trying to come out on its own, along with the maple leaf. Not now. Even if he were to fight, there was no need to reveal all his cards. This was not a fight worth doing so. I have to lose this fight. That was why he had picked a fight he couldn't win in the first place. Crackle. Status ailment. Burn rises to stage 2. The burn worsened, and he began to feel as if his flesh was melting. As long as there's a clue about the divine item, Amaterasu won't be able to go all the way. The guild that had fought the Sandwichen the longest was Asgard. Odin had fought Amaterasu for a long time, so he knew how obsessed she was with the divine item. In fact, Amaterasu, who had once gathered all the divine items, had reached a high ranking in the top 10. Even if she kills me, it'll be after she finds the Yata mirror. Yuan was the only one who had obtained clues about the divine item through the administrator. For Amaterasu, who had been searching for the Yata mirror for a long time, Yuan was someone she could never kill. Hand over the clues you know. Then I'll spare you. Crackle, crackle, a penalty began to flow through Amaterasu's body. But she didn't care about such things. Since Yuan had climbed to the 44th floor in the first place, the gap between their floors wasn't that big, so the penalty was quite weak. For Amaterasu, a high ranker in the top 50, this level of penalty was not a big burden. Cooperation is one thing, but asking me to hand over everything, that's too much of a loss for me. That's mine anyway. If you get your hands on the mirror, I'll take it back even if I have to wipe out the Cheon Masangyo. Am I the only one backing the Cheon Masangyo? You don't belong to any guild. That much is. Amaterasu's eyes narrowed. It was because of the badge that Yuan took out. Boom. The intense heat that filled the tavern disappeared in an instant. The magical energy that seemed as though it would explode just a moment ago subsided. Did you trust Asgard, a symbol of the Golden Castle? It was a precious item that even Asgard players did not possess. A gift given to special guests recognized by Odin. A kind of invitation. Since it was in Yuan's hand, Amaterasu couldn't help but think about Yuan's relationship with Asgard. It would be annoying if Asgard was behind this. I can't kill this guy right now, and it's difficult to extract information from him by force. There was only one way. I can't give up the Yata mirror. Negotiation. Amaterasu no longer saw Yuan as someone she could overpower and take something from. In order to get what she really wanted, she needed to cooperate a little. Tell me what you want. Can you give me something comparable to the 3 artifact? I'll kill 100 people you want. Be my sword in the meantime. It was quite an attractive offer. No matter how precious an item or points were, it was impossible to hire a top-class high ranker like Amaterasu. It was a condition that anyone who knew the value of a high ranker would have to accept. Yuan, who had been contemplating for a while, asked. Can I save them instead of killing them? Instead, I'll count saving as 10. I hate that kind of thing. It doesn't matter. Then I'll accept it. That's a good decision. Amaterasu reached out to Yuan. With different intentions, the two shook hands. Amaterasu shook hands with Yuan. Yuan gave Amaterasu the minimum amount of information. He hid the rest. Amaterasu soon left. As Yuan returned to his room, the soul that had been wriggling around until now spoke to him. Do you believe her, Susano? It had been a long time since he had spoken. Thanks to the title, King of the Dead, Yuan could hear the voices of souls even when he was not in the queue. No, I don't, but you shook her hand. Is there a reason not to? Both her and I are wearing masks. It was a hand held out of necessity, with different purposes. That's why Yuan didn't hesitate to take her hand. Susano realized what Yuan had been doing all this time through this meeting with Amaterasu. You called her here on purpose. With the imaginary bait of the 3 artifact. The 3 artifact was a delicious bait to lure out the 3-eyed. The excuse of being an administrator, and the 10 days of searching for the 3 artifact. It was all for this meeting. What do you want? Are you drawing a big picture like when you destroyed Olympus? The 3 artifact was like a long-cherished wish for the 3-eyed. The fact that they were looking for the 3 artifact was something that any player who knew anything about the world would know. That's why Susano thought that Yuan had used the 3 artifact as bait to lure them out. What on earth was Yuan planning? As much as he had planned to destroy Olympus, Yuan must have been drawing another big picture. However, there's one thing wrong. Even though Susano had been watching everything from right next to him, he didn't know everything. What's wrong? Fishing without bait is bound to fail. Susano's soul shook violently at Yuan's answer. Then surely, it wasn't fishing without bait. There was only one meaning to those words. The Yata mirror, does it really exist? Chapter 190. Is the Yata no Kagami real? He showed curiosity for the first time in a long while, even though he didn't seem interested in destroying Olympus. He was the one who had acquired the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. As such, he understood the value of the 3 sacred treasures the most. It's here. Wow, you're crazy. Susano lost his words for a moment because of his confident reply. His excitement was felt through the soul. Just like Amaterasu, he coveted the 3 sacred treasures. No matter how dead they were, the desires they had when they were alive didn't disappear. If the bait is there for sure, even Amaterasu will have to take it. Do you really think of it as just a bait? I can't help it since it's not in my hands right now. I have no choice but to use it this way. No matter how amazing an item was, it was useless if it wasn't in one's possession. That was why Yuan thought of using the 3 sacred treasures in a different way instead of using them. There are ways to use the existence of the 3 sacred treasures. It's not bad for a bait. This was Yuan's suggestion. After reviewing it several times, its possibility was confirmed. The meeting with Amaterasu was the start. You use things that aren't in your hands. The way you fight in your mouth. I hate guys like you. What do you mean, guys like me? Perfectionists. Guys who don't fight battles they can't win. It wasn't a wrong statement. It wasn't like that from the beginning, but Yuan had to be that way since he went back to the past with the clockwork. A fight is something you should do while facing death. Only then will the tip of your sword become the sharpest and strongest. It's not very persuasive coming from someone who's dead. That's not why. Susanoo flared up. As if he was very resentful, he sent heated words. If it wasn't for Amaterasu, what did she do? It was the first time he heard of this. He definitely knew that all of the three nobles were like siblings and had great friendship. He was curious. Was it some secret story from the past that no one knew? Yuan knew that Susanoo died fighting the Yamata no Orochi. What are you talking about? The Yamata no Orochi. She was the one who incited me to fight that thing. And she definitely promised to fight with me, but she didn't help me at all. Yamata no Orochi, the worst monster that destroyed several cities. There was a secret hidden in Susanoo's fight with the monster that even many rankers couldn't stop. She set a trap, to get the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Amaterasu's number was saved in Yuan's player kit. It was to contact each other when needed. He waited 10 days to receive this number. The prerequisite was solved. Now all that was left was to find the real bait. This is annoying. Early in the morning, Yuan felt gazes looking at him as he left his lodging. If you're going to look at me so openly, I can't help but see you. In front of Yuan's lodging, there were eyes watching Yuan all over the alley. They were the ones who heard that Yuan had a clue about the 3 sacred treasures and followed him around, hoping for a lucky catch. It seemed like they were planning on watching Yuan's every move. He couldn't move around comfortably like this. How long are they going to follow me? Yuan walked outside the city. Maybe because he changed his destination, more people followed him. He felt like a shepherd. The number continued to grow, surpassing 100. Just like that, Yuan left the city. Outside the underdeveloped city was a forest that hadn't been developed. As such, Yuan came out of the city. Outside the run-down city was an undeveloped forest. Let's go in a little bit. How far are you going to follow me? Yuan, who had suddenly stopped walking, turned around. It seemed like there were a little over 100, but there were more than that. When he used the flower of eyes, the number became clearer. About 300. This was too much, even if it was a lot. Did Amaterasu put them on my tail? The power that the Samdias wielded on the 44th floor was considerable. They had the influence to bring together various criminals who were spread out like a dotted organization. It seemed that they wanted to monitor Yuan's actions. As expected, it's the Samgwaha's orders. One of them stepped forward with an oppressive tone. He was just a big ball of muscle, nothing special. He probably believed in 2 things. The first would be their numbers, and the second would be the name of the Samdias. I don't plan on fighting, so don't be so uptight. Just do what you need to do. Yuan shrugged at the man's words. Keep following me, I don't need this kind of popularity. It was an margin round appearance that didn't match the situation. Even though he knew that the Samdias were following him, Yuan wasn't that flustered. He knew that this would happen anyway. No, rather, he had been waiting for this to happen. Amaterasu isn't here. Amaterasu wasn't a high ranker who was good at searching or hiding. On the other hand, the Flower of Eyes was a top-tier skill among search-type skills. Even when he searched using the Flower of Eyes, he couldn't see Amaterasu. Perhaps he had gone to find the Mirror of Yata with the clue that Yuan had given him. You don't need to, but we can't help it. We're following you. That's the Samgwaha's will. In other words, it meant not to resist. To the criminals on the 44th floor, the Samdias were like gods. They were branded as criminals and had nowhere to go. No guild would accept them. However, the Samdias were different. To them, crime was nothing more than an act of wielding power in freedom. Since it was an order from their only fence, they had no choice but to follow. Really, Yuan looked at them with meaningful eyes. The scenery in front of him right now was the reason he had to fight the Samdias. You're still as incompetent as ever. Susanoo mumbled in a disgusted tone. I agree. For the first time, he agreed with Susanoo. The Samdias had changed. The freedom they spoke of had, at some point, become something that only the wicked could enjoy. The Samdias had somehow turned into the leaders of evil, and it had become a single group. Like a criminal guild, Amaterasu, that bastard got drunk on the power of the group. He brought in a bunch of idiots and played king, and his ideology changed. The power of a criminal group with cohesion is terrifying. No matter how small a rat may be, if there are thousands or tens of thousands of them, the ecosystem will collapse. What's more, those who commit crimes were strong people with great power. The power of the Samdhyas, who have gathered all three of the Samjinkas, is comparable to Olympus. Amaterasu was already ranked higher than the other two Samshans, excluding Zeus. However, Amaterasu, who had gathered all three Samjinkas, now had an incomparably higher ranking than before. He's quite talented. The problem was his greed. That was Odin's assessment of Amaterasu. Greed for power. In order to fulfill that greed, Amaterasu had crossed the line more and more. Uniting the criminals of the 44th floor under the name of freedom and becoming their king. That was the power that Amaterasu had chosen. The power of a united criminal group is enough to create internal division. The fact that I couldn't nip that bud in the bud was homework that I failed to solve. That was one of Odin's few regrets. I made a misjudgment. I thought that as long as people exist, there must be a dark side. I thought it would be better for them to be gathered in one place rather than scattered throughout the tower. But that wasn't the case. Once they took the form of a guild, the Samgwajaja's influence increased rapidly. Once a wave starts, it's difficult to stop it. When the crime rate in the tower was at its peak, Yuan recalled that time. Players who weren't rankers hesitated to climb the tower, and those who couldn't even have a system and weren't chosen as players were afraid to even go outside. I need to get rid of the center. That was what Yuan had to do here. I'm going to pass you guys now. Magic power flowed out of Yuan's body. Screech. A jet black sword emerged from its sheath. Yuan drew his weapon for the first time since coming to the 44th floor. No one will be unjustly killed, but if you are, run away quickly. The eyebrows of the man who had taken the lead twitched at those words. Do you mean to fight the Samgwajaja? You're the ones who picked a fight. I'm just going to watch what you do. I have no intention of attacking. I'm not under the Samgwajaja. It's just a collaboration. Surveillance. That's funny. Do you think you'll be safe like this? That's not my concern. Bam! The forest lit up. The landscape of the battlefield changed with the flames that spread like a large forest fire. Fire. So suddenly. What are you doing? Pooh, put it out. Flames caused by magic power can be extinguished with the same magic power. Players who had acquired water attribute magic power used their skills to try to put out the fire Yuan had created, but it was useless. Roar. The holy fire did not go out. Crunch. Now, choose quickly. Yuan walked through the flames that were growing as if oil had been poured on them and opened his mouth. Die or live. Crackle, crackle. The remaining embers of the fire weakened as they clung to the trees. The ground was littered with charred corpses. The forest, where all the fires had been extinguished, was not much different from before. There wasn't a single burnt tree. The holy fire was a fire that burned only what Yuan wanted. Crunch. Yuan walked out between the corpses. No one had escaped. A few rankers and hundreds of players. They had all gathered their strength to fight Yuan and had ultimately lost. A perfect victory. However, the battle was not very satisfying. It's uncomfortable without the items. This was the first proper fight since coming to the 44th floor. As such, he could feel the absence of 3 items, including Thunderbolt, in this fight. I can see why they rely so much on items. He used to think that the most important thing for a player was stats, followed by skills, and then items. However, those thoughts had been changing little by little lately. Stats, skills, items. None of them were unimportant. Depending on their value, skills and items could be more important than stats. That was how much lighter his body felt after losing just a few items. Yuan recalled his past life. If I had items and skills like this back then, maybe the outcome would have been a little different. Wang. Yuan's player kit rang. It wasn't a text message, but a call. Yuan checked the caller and answered the phone. Then, what the hell are you doing right now? Amaterasu's voice came through, sounding very angry. Chapter 191. We clearly agreed not to cooperate, didn't we? I felt that he was relying on me a lot. I don't know how he found out, but it seems that he has somehow become aware of the situation on this side. Of course, it was only a matter of time before Amaterasu found out about this situation anyway. I couldn't just leave those guys alone while they were following me. They're guys I sent. I know. You knew and you still did that. Are you trying to fight me right now? I have no intention of hanging out with guys like that. They kill people and steal from them. They're lowlifes. I don't care if you use them or whatever, but don't get me involved. What is this? I'm hanging up. Goodbye. Yuan immediately put the player kit into his inventory. There was no point in just arguing with him. It would only make me angry, but I had the sword anyway. Until I get my hands on the Yata mirror, Amaterasu will never be able to kill me. But I don't have much time. At the shortest, half a year. At the longest, about a year. Amaterasu will probably watch over Yuan until then. To see if he will be of any help in finding the Yata mirror. And only when he decides that it's taking too long or that it's not necessary will he draw his sword. So, in order to fight the 3 demons, I must first gather 2 of the 3 divine treasures. Especially if the background is the 44th floor. There is only 1 divine treasure left. I should go look for it. Clang, the marble table shattered. The bottle of alcohol on the table fell to the floor and shattered, spilling clear alcohol onto the floor. A fiery gaze shot out of Amaterasu's eyes as he slammed his fist down. That son of a... The call was cut off abruptly. It meant that there was nothing more to say. I never thought he would be so confident, even though I had begged him to the point of wearing out my hands. Once I find the divine treasures, I will definitely kill him. Whether the background was Asgard, Heaven, or Veda, it didn't matter anymore. Anyway, once I gather all the divine treasures, I will have no reason to fear the large guilds. Creak. Amaterasu leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling. We're finally here. One of the divine treasures was in his hands. The other, the sword of Kusanagi, had disappeared with Susanoo, and with the appearance of Kim Yuan, he had obtained the last clue. A face came to Amaterasu's mind above his black pupil. That guy, he got the sword of Kusanagi. Susanoo. His brother, the strongest of the 3 demons. As a 57th ranked high ranker, he had held a similar ranking to himself, who had obtained the divine treasure, even before the days when he had the sword of Kusanagi. If he had been active with the sword of Kusanagi before he died from the poison of Yamada no Orochi, he had a good idea of how high his ranking would have been. If that guy gathers all the divine treasures instead of me, what kind of monster would be created? He closed his eyes and the image of Susanoo wielding his sword and sweeping across the battlefield came to mind. He was very reliable to have your back. If he was facing you with his sword, there was nothing to be afraid of. He is a sword demon. He uses his sword like a ghost, so everyone fears him like a ghost. That's why he got that nickname, and I thought it suited him well. When I first found one of the divine treasures, the Yasukani no Magatama, Tsukuyomi, Susanoo, and Amaterasu gathered together to discuss who would have it. No, they tried to discuss it. You two figure it out. The guy who said that in a dull voice as he wiped the blood off his sword with a cloth. I'm not interested in that. You can't kill anyone with a bead like that, so what use is it? The power of the Yasukani no Magatama was not something that deserved to hear such words. And Susanoo knew that as well. Even so, Susanoo did not pay attention to the Sanshin key. That guy had always been like that. He had no interest in items or anything like that. Becoming stronger was not something that interested him either. He only wanted one thing. To jump into the battlefield and dance with his sword, cutting and slashing. Arrogant bastard, Pifut, 1,000 years ago. Amaterasu, who had obtained the Yasukani no Magatama, rose to 60th place in the rankings. That was it. When she checked the rankings, Amaterasu felt a sense of powerlessness that she had never felt before. Why on earth? Why couldn't she surpass Susanoo's ranking? Even after getting her hands on the Sanshin key, she couldn't surpass Susanoo. She couldn't accept it. She was stronger. She was better. The Ranking Management Bureau must have made a mistake. However, Amaterasu knew that there was no way that the Ranking Management Bureau would make a mistake. And it was from that time that Amaterasu's goal became Susanoo. Now I'm above you. That guy was already dead and gone anyway. A relic of the past, whose name could no longer be seen in the rankings. Now, she surpassed him in everything, from ranking to power to influence. Collecting the Sanshin key, Susanoo, who had given up on the Yasukani no Magatama. Amaterasu gritted her teeth as she recalled the sword of Kusanagi that he had gotten his hands on at the end. It's me, Susanoo. Ha 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 het, this is fun, so much fun. A voice that buzzed in his ears. Perhaps because he had relaxed his soul, Susanoo, who had been quiet since he went up to the 44th floor, had become more talkative. Be quiet. How can I be quiet when it's so much fun? It's more exciting than I thought. This is the first time I've liked something. After unilaterally ending the call with Amaterasu, Susanoo burst into laughter without stopping. As if trying to make up for not having laughed for 1,000 years, he recalled that time over and over again. Arthur couldn't stand his laughter and said something, but it didn't matter. Wu Jin frowned at the two people squabbling that made his head ring. Stop it, it's getting noisier and noisier. Alright, geez, I can't even laugh as I please. Even as he said that, his laughter continued for a while. Wu Jin ignored his gradually fading laughter and kept walking. What are we going to do now? What, are we going to look for the Yata no Kagami from now on? Do you know where it is? I have a rough idea. There was no path in the forest that was covered with trees. Wu Jin brandished his sword in its scabbard and cut down the leaves of the trees that were blocking his view as he moved. A cave, I'm looking for a cave. Surely that's not all you have to go on. I have one more thing. Wu Jin replied and shook the sword in his hand. If that's the case, only then did Susanoo realize that the sword Wu Jin was holding was different from usual. The sword of Kusanagi, the scabbard that had been used to brush away leaves. Wu Jin seemed to know what kind of expression Susanoo would be making even without looking. You've been using this to cut down branches. It's 100 times better than cutting people. A sword is meant to cut living things. The sword of Kusanagi is the best item for that. These trees are all alive too. In that sense, it's the perfect use for it. This crazy, Susanoo had lost his life before he could even properly use the sword of Kusanagi. No wonder his last wish before he died was to dance wildly with the sword of Kusanagi. When he first held the sword of Kusanagi in this hand was merely cutting a branch, he was breathless. Certainly, it feels good. Yuan stared at the sword of Kusanagi's head. Even though it clearly had its blade shrouded within the hard cover, it suragavium the feeling that it would cut his fingertips. Yuan had never felt a sword so keen. It was sharp enough to come out of the sheath. The term demon sword was noticed in vain. In the short term, my fighting capabilities will increase exponentially, but that is the limit. These word of Kusanagi's sharpness died in Sutu One's fighting style. If I relied on the sharpness of the blade, his fighting style would completely change. The sharpness of the blade of the Black Knight sword was enough. But what do you mean the sword of Kusanagi Saklu? The three sacred treasures were original Lion, the form is totally different. 1. The reason Amaterasu is trying to collect the three sacred treasures is because of that. Because it's an item that can only exert its power when all three are collected. 1. This was information that even Susanoo, one of the three evils, didn't know. Of course, all the three evils knew about was the information on the three sacred treasures. They would only learn about what kind of objects they were after the three sacred treasures were all gathered. Exactly when all three sacred treasures were gathered, the heyday of the three evils would begin from that moment. Where did you learn about that? There are things that everyone knows. You really are clueless. Since it was a question he had wondered about several times, Susanoo had already given up on understanding Yuan. Of course, to him, who didn't know about the existence of the clock tower, Yuan's existence would only feel extraordinary. Then can you find the Yata mirror with the sword of Kusanagi? How? There is one more clue. What is it? A cave. A cave, the Yata mirror is in a cave. Those were the words that even Amaterasu is used to tell him with her own mouth. The Yata mirror, which he had been searching for, was in a cave closer than he thought. Slice. The scabbard of the Kusanagi cut the leaves once again. How long had it been since he passed through the forest, creating a path? Yuan, who had been walking, raised the corners of his lips. I found one. The cave, which was far beyond the bushes, appeared in Yuan's vision, who was using the heavenly eye. A cave located on a tall and long mountain range. There were several entrances, but in the end, the cave was connected as one. I just have to find the entrance. It won't be that difficult. The 44th floor wasn't that wide. A single, giant mountain range that pierced the world. And a giant forest centered around the mountain range, and a few cities located here and there. Once he found the mountain range, it wasn't that difficult to find the entrance to the cave. Thud, Yuan stepped into the wide entrance of the cave. The entrance itself wasn't that wide. It was about 4 meters wide. It was an entrance that looked like a wild beast would come and go. The problem is inside, a quiet cave with not even the sound of water droplets. As Yuan stepped inside, the deep interior of the cave was reflected in his eyes. It's much wider than it looks. Paths that were tangled in a complicated manner. It was as if this giant mountain range itself was a giant labyrinth. As long as he had the heavenly eye, it wasn't difficult to find a path no matter how complicated the labyrinth was. Since he could use the sensory field and the heavenly eye to look down on the labyrinth from above and find a path. However, the purpose of this labyrinth wasn't to find an exit. He had to find an object inside this complicated mountain range that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. It was a task that could take an unknown amount of time. That's why no one has found it for so long. If he had been empty-handed, he probably wouldn't have been any different. Buzz. The blade of the sword of Kusanagi trembled slightly. One of the 3 sacred treasures. Among the high rankers, the item that would later be known by the nickname, compass, began to operate. Chapter 192. Yuan looked around, feeling the tremor of Kusanagi. Kusanagi was a peculiar item. It was the only artifact that reacted to the other 2 divine artifacts. The reason Kusanagi was called the compass was here. The desire to become one. Kusanagi was the center of the divine artifacts, pulling the other 2. Perhaps Amaterasu was able to find Yata no Kagami later because she found Kusanagi first. I didn't know Kusanagi had this function. Have you ever obtained Kusanagi and met Amaterasu? If you did, you would have been robbed of Kusanagi. So, did you hide the relics in such a place? Without the 3 nobles knowing? I'd rather die twice than let that guy get his hands on Kusanagi. There was a voice filled with resentment. It seemed that Amaterasu and he didn't get along well. I never thought I would end up rooting for you, but this time, I have to. Yata no Kagami and Kusanagi. Just let him get his hands on them, see what happens. That won't happen. Yuan nodded. It was not as simple as giving away 2 of the divine artifacts and handing them over to Amaterasu. It would accelerate the prime time of the 3 nobles by hundreds of years. On the contrary, what if I take them away? That would be pleasing. After losing to Yuan, the one who had been dissatisfied with him so far seemed to react quite differently after this incident. Contrary to expectations, it seemed that Susanoo's resentment would diminish considerably in this fight with the 3 nobles. In that case, then, maybe, Yuan took a step inside the cave and hesitantly asked. Can you help me in this fight? Help you, me. Just for this fight, I won't force you afterwards. The completion of the undead comes when the soul is subjugated. Susanoo already had the body. The soul was also in Yuan's hands. But even if he subjugated Susanoo with the power of the title, if he forced him to act as an undead, he would not be able to draw out his full potential. Susanoo had to make up his mind. Only then could the strongest undead be created. Deep contemplation was felt. Perhaps because it was a problem he had never thought about before, Susanoo was lost in thought for a considerable amount of time. The road ahead was long anyway. Yuan awaited an answer while using Kusanagi to find the way. How many hours had passed? All right, Susanoo made a decision. Just this once. Yuan's lips curved up. It's enough. Unexpectedly, the strongest pact was completed. Crash. The walls of the maze collapsed. Yuan, who was making a path, felt the intensity of Kusanagi's resonance in his hand increase. It's not far now. For days, he pierced through the maze, breaking through the thin walls and searching the inside of the mountain range. The long cave felt endless. However, at some point, Kusanagi began to wail intensely. It really was here. Now, as if realizing it, Susanoo's voice trembled. It was a different feeling from when he found the first divine artifact, the 8-span mirror. The third no, the final artifact. Simply knowing where something is and discovering it were completely different issues. Susanoo had little interest in the divine artifacts. He considered relying on items to be beneath a swordsman's dignity. But even such a Susanoo could not ignore the divine artifacts. For the 3 nobles, the divine artifacts were something more valuable than mere items. Divine artifacts. In a way, they were nothing. Yuan felt the trembling of the Kusanagi and looked around. An empty cave with nothing in it. For several days, Yuan had heard no other sound than the sound of his own footsteps. It was a cave where not even a single insect lived, let alone people, monsters, or animals. Of course, it was good that there were no monsters. The monsters on the 44th floor would hardly be worth any experience points to the current Yuan, and they would only be a nuisance. However, the problem was that there wasn't anything there when there should have been. Where the hell is it? Unlike the reaction of the Kusanagi, there was nothing here. He wondered if he should go further, but he only seemed to get further away. The location was definitely here. A bath, bah! At that moment, Dan Ah, who was on Yuan's shoulder, suddenly stretched out both hands towards the Kusanagi. The guy who had seemed like he would wait as Yuan had said, was suddenly showing a strange reaction. Could it be? Yuan didn't know how Amaterasu had found the Yata's mirror. He had only heard that he used the sword, Kusanagi, but the process was not known. That was why he had only found the location, but had not been able to find where the Yata's mirror was. However, Thud, thud, Yu-Won felt the texture of the ground beneath his feet change as he walked. It was different from what it looked like on the surface. Fire Eyes perceives the truth. Sensory field is activated. Magic power is activated. Fire Eyes is strengthened. Sensory field is strengthened. Tisk, tisk, tisk. A crimson aura rose around Yu-Won. As he activated his skills along with his magic power, things that had been invisible until now began to appear. The symmetrical image of himself reflected under his feet. That was the moment he discovered it. Yada's mirror has been discovered. Yada's dungeon is activated. Creak. Under his feet, the walls of the cave, and the ceiling. The black and dark cave walls turned completely transparent. A blinding light burst forth, threatening to make him go blind. However, Yu-Won didn't close his eyes. By the time the bright light had disappeared, the background had changed. Thud. Yu-Won touched the floor again with the tip of his foot. The texture was no different from before. Yes, this wasn't stone, but the smooth texture of a mirror. This entire space is the Yada's mirror. Swish. Yu-Won turned his head. His eyes, which had turned red, scanned the surroundings that had turned into a mirror. But, thousands, tens of thousands of Kim Yu-Wons were reflected. The same posture and the same face, all standing in different directions. Was the mirror this big? A mirror the size of a cave. That was the moment he faced the mirror. Yada's trial begins. Whoosh. The images of Yu-Won reflected on the countless mirror walls disappeared. It was strange. Yu-Won looked around one side of the mirror. It was definitely a mirror, but nothing was reflected. It felt like he was a ghost. A trial. If it was a trial, then he was all for it. Yu-Won, who had once climbed to the top of the tower, had passed countless trials. Rather than fighting recklessly, Yu-Won preferred a fight with rules. But what kind of trial was it talking about? Creak. A strange flow of magic power. When he turned his head in the direction where he felt the flow, he saw a single mirror floating in the void. A mirror about 3 meters in size. In the flat mirror without any other decorations or ornaments, only Yu-Won's figure was reflected. Flick. The Yu-Won in the mirror took a step. Yu-Won didn't move. If the Yu-Won reflected until now was just himself in the mirror, then that was something else. However, who are you? Yu-Won couldn't accept this trial. Why is I coming out of me? The me that Yu-Won spoke of was not his current self. Thud. His foot stepped out of the mirror. Yu-Won looked at the other self that was reflected in the mirror. Defeat yourself. This test would definitely be a test of overcoming oneself. That was the only way to obtain Yada's mirror, and if that was the case, it was convincing enough. However, the problem was that the Kim Yu-Won in front of his eyes was not his current self. What the heck? The clone of Yu-Won that walked out of the mirror made a strange expression as it looked at Yu-Won. Is it a doppelganger? A pure white sword. A famous sword from Hephaestus called White Knight. It was a name that Yu-Won himself had named after receiving the gift. He could tell by looking at the sword. The Kim Yu-Won in front of him. He was the same as himself, an existence from the future. Something's wrong. It was the first time he felt nervous after coming to the past using the clockwork. The being in front of him was not simply another self. Yada's mirror reflects me. This is a test to defeat myself. Yu-Won stood still, staring at his clone that had appeared in front of him like a statue. Perhaps this means I haven't accepted my current self yet. Yada's mirror did not simply reflect appearances. The mirror reflected the inside. The mirror duplicated the image of Yu-Won that he was looking at. Can I win? The clone in front of him was his future self. A being of a different dimension from his current self. Creepy. Just facing him made his body feel numb. Rather than the magical power or energy, he was overwhelmed by his very existence. A being who fought in a war against outer gods along with monsters like Heavenly Demon, Hercules, and Odin. That was his future self. Compared to that guy, his current self was nothing more than a fly. It won't be as strong as the real me. No matter how great the divine tool, Yada's mirror, is, it can't create a clone of a ranker in the top 10. It wasn't just simple arrogance. Yu-Won knew his own abilities that well. Still, it's probably close to the limit of what Yada's mirror can create. It was an unfair test. Because he had returned to the past using the clockwork, the difficulty level was much higher than others. What are you? You don't seem to be a simple doppelganger. Creak. A familiar flow of magical power spread out from the clone. Sensory field was deployed. The clone realized through that skill that Yu-Won wasn't a doppelganger. You're a person, but you look exactly like me. Not just your face, but your height, physique, and even your expressions. The clone's tone of voice was no different from his own. Analytical and calm. If a being exactly like him appeared, and not as a doppelganger, he would be bewildered, but the clone didn't seem unfamiliar with this situation. It might have been an effect of Yada's mirror. But even if it wasn't, Yuan was sure that he would be able to remain calm in this situation if he was himself. Tell me, what the hell are you? Swish. The clone's sword, White Knight, was drawn. A pure white blade that radiated a dazzling light. As it was himself, Yuan was able to predict the clone's next move. If you don't answer, I'll cut you down. That was his way. I am. A very brief moment. Yuan came up with the best answer. He used dozens or hundreds of moments in a split second. A fight didn't necessarily have to involve swords or skills. Even though only words were exchanged, the fight had already begun. And now, Yuan, who had been thinking about the best answer, made his first attack. Sun Ogong, whoosh, fire eye, reads the movement. The clone's eyes widened at Yuan's eyes that had turned red. Chapter 193. Reddened vision. It was rare for him to focus his eyes to this extent. The world of Wu Yun looking at the doppelganger felt slow, as if it had stopped for a moment. The movement of muscles, changes in expression, heart rate based on emotions. Everything seemed to be laid bare. Wu Yun's eyes were not simply looking at the doppelganger right now. He made his first move. Now, the next fight begins. Sun Ogong. His eyebrows twitched, bewilderment and doubt. Both were written on his expression at the same time. Are you saying that you are the doppelganger of that monkey? Monkey. From that word, Wu Yun realized that the doppelganger in front of him was himself at a certain point in time. There was a time when he openly called Sun Ogong a monkey. It seemed that he looked like he was from around that time. Either way, it's terrible. Even so, it was a time when he was quite close to Sun Ogong. He would only call him a monkey, but when they met face to face, they would greet each other. Sun Ogong was the one person he could introduce as a friend, even though he always traveled alone. Transforming into someone with the doppelganger technique. You still use strange skills. Sun Ogong's doppelganger shared skills with Sun Ogong. And among Sun Ogong's skills, he also had the skill to transform into a specific person or object in his head. But it's strange. Despite the explanation, the doppelganger did not erase the questionable expression as he looked at Wu Yun. If you were the doppelganger of that monkey, there's no way I wouldn't recognize you. His words trailed off. The red energy that appeared in Wu Yun's eyes. It was not the eye of fire and gold, but it was definitely similar to the eye of fire and gold. However, the sensory field that the doppelganger used said that Wu Yun was a real entity that had not used any transformation techniques. So, he was even more confused. A person with the same eyes as Sun Ogong. He was puzzled as to who Wu Yun really was. And then. Now, pop, screech, Wu Yun's sword was drawn, and magic energy flowed into the blade. Supreme Magic Sword is activated. Holy Fire is activated. Rumble. Along with the Supreme Magic Sword skill that he had bought with expensive coins, Holy Fire surrounded the sword. The compressed fire and magic energy made the sword even sharper. From a distance that was already close, Wu Yun's sword flew, aiming precisely for the doppelganger's neck. A surprise attack isn't a very good idea. The doppelganger, who had also drawn his sword halfway, tried to respond, but at that moment, the tip of the doppelganger's foot moved to the side. Swish, crackle, the doppelganger's cheek was cut. A few drops of blood splattered and fell to the floor, leaving a red mark on the transparent mirror. The doppelganger, who was now far away, touched his cheek with one hand. Blood came out on his hand. A necromancer, the man who swung his sword behind his back. Arthur, who held Excalibur in his hand, faced Wu Yun. There was more than one. Two people were reflected in the doppelganger's pupils. Arthur, and the other person was a rancor with a ruffian-like head and face. Is this your first battle? Thud. Ares laughed, loosening his awkward body. I don't know why, but you look like a guy who's just the right amount of motivated. Ares smiled as he looked at the doppelganger, who looked exactly like Wu Yun. Not long ago, he had possessed the body of a rancor's corpse that he had met at the tavern, and he had become Wu Yun's arms and legs. Are you not going to help? Is that guy Amaterasu? Despite Wu Yun's request, Susanoo refused adamantly. It looks fun, but I'm not interested. I'd rather you die here and the Samson artifact be buried forever. It was not a wrong statement. To Susanoo, Wu Yun and Amaterasu were not much different. For Susanoo, Yuan shouldn't have been much different from Amaterasu. He had lost Ares and Arthur by sacrificing them. Buddha seemed to have figured out the approximate power level of the clone in front of him. Yuan was a necromancer who had been restraining his soul, and a materus who had been his nemesis, who had been involved in his death. Naturally, from Susanu's perspective, the best result would be for Yuan to die here. If that happened, Yuan would die and Amaterasu would never be able to assemble the 3 divine treasures, so that she would also be getting the short end of the stick. How will you make me acknowledge you? Become stronger than me. Then I'll accept you as my master. A high ranker ranked 57th. He, a high ranker ranked higher than the 2 other gods besides Zeus, was saying that he had to become stronger than him. Well, that's not hard. Time will take care of that. Right now, he had to get past the version of himself in front of him. But I've definitely learned this. Swish. The clone wiped the blood from its face with its hand, and the wound healed back to its original state as if it had never been there. You're not that monkey's clone. An ability that could quickly recover something as small as a scratch. Super regeneration. It was one of the skills that Yuan originally had. Unlike its grandiose name, it wasn't that great of a recovery skill, but the important thing was that it could heal any wound. Even if an arm was cut off, it was a skill that would eventually regenerate it. Instead, the recovery time was long, so it was a skill that was more effective for removing aftereffects after a battle rather than during a battle. Still, it's not hard to heal a wound of that level. It was a skill that he had taken for granted before, but now that he saw it, he was newly amazed. 3-on-1. Wang. The clone's magic power began to move. A sensory field spread out in all directions. He could clearly feel that he was inside that area. Yuan also used a sensory field. He used Fire Eye and the sensory field, 2 skills, to observe the movements of the clone in front of him. Surprise appeared in the clone's eyes once again. Half-assed, but Fire Eye and a sensory field. Familiar skills that Yuan had. What the hell are you? The clone felt curious about Yuan. The sensory field was a skill that only Yuan had in the tower. No, the same went for Fire Eye. A unique skill that only one person had. But Yuan had 2 of them. Whoever the opponent is, what does that matter? Screech. Clang, clang, clang. Ares' sword cut the clone's body in half. The clone, who looked like he was going to spray blood, disappeared from that spot as if he had scattered and reappeared behind Ares. Clatter. The bottom of the mirror froze. This guy is. At that moment, Arthur's sword, which flew in as if it was sliding, pierced the clone's neck. Swish. My master. Thud. Excalibur was embedded in the clone's head. But for a moment, Arthur realized that he didn't feel any particular sensation at the tip of the sword. This time it's Excalibur. Quote exclamation mark quote. Thud. Bang. Arthur's body flew and was embedded in the wall. The mirror of Yada was strangely harder than any metal, and despite the fact that he had flown and crashed into it with considerable force, there wasn't a single scratch on it. The more I look at him, the more amazing he is. Fire Eye, the sensory field, Excalibur. Every single one of them was a skill and item that was famous in this tower. By now, the clone wasn't looking at Yuan with the same eyes as before. He, who had thought Yuan was suspicious because he looked exactly like him, had now become an object of curiosity. It doesn't seem like you're planning on answering, so should I force you to talk? Creak. The clone, who had sent Arthur flying with a punch to his side, looked at the 3 of them with an impassive face. And in response to the clone's reaction, Yuan narrowed his brow and frowned. He's really unlucky when it comes to talking. A guy who lived to show off how awesome he was. That was exactly who he was. But I can figure out about this much. A brief offense and defense. Although he had sacrificed Arthur and Ares, he thought he had roughly figured out the ability value of the doppelganger before him. Arthur stood up without collapsing. Undead never die. They were existences that would endlessly resurrect and never truly die as long as Eugene's magic power did not run out. The drained magic power. This amount was exactly the amount of damage Arthur had taken from the doppelganger just now. The odds of winning aren't that high. It would be nice if Susano helped. He could summon Susano as an undead right now, but the consumption of magic power was too great. Not only was it uncertain how much help the incomplete Susano would be right now, but the consumption of magic power would be too great if he did so. Right now, he didn't know how long the fight would drag on. Rather than taking a risk, Eugene came up with a different method. Your mouth seems a bit heavy. Susit. His footwork became lighter. It was the beginning. Then I have no choice but to pry it open somehow. Put. The doppelganger, who had returned to Eugene's side at some point, reached out towards Eugene's face. And that moment, shuck, quack, as if he had been waiting, Eugene dodged back his body and head and swung his sword. Pung, poopapoo-pung. The flames that erupted with the sword strike engulfed the doppelganger and exploded. Having prepared the blow in advance, Eugene moved forward as if to ask when he had stepped back. Suik, Jung, the sword and the sword clashed. A white blade and a black blade. Both were Hephaestus creations, so there was no need to even mention their strength and hardness. Tongue, Eugene's body was pushed back and sent flying. He wasn't pushed back that much in terms of magic power. Eugene's current magic power stat was 118. To this extent, it was a number that wouldn't lose out to even the mid-level high rankers. However, my strength is lacking. Unlike his explosively high magic power stat, it was true that he was lacking in other stats. Jarrett, the tingling sensation he felt in his grip. If the shock was this much, then there was an overwhelming difference in strength. Jang, reacting to the sword wasn't a problem. It was thanks to the fire eyes and sensory field. However, everything other than magic power was being pushed back. There was only one way in this situation. The power of a giant dwells in your entire body. The power of a giant dwells in your arms. You have partially acquired complete gigantification. Kukunduk, his arms swelled up. A vitality and strength that felt like he could do anything dwelled in his entire body. Jiang, Kwa, he pushed back Ares, who had rushed in with the shock of their swords clashing. Eugene's feet were not pushed back like before. His sword held out tautly. The doppelganger, with a surprised expression, and Eugene, who wasn't satisfied with the result, faced each other, putting strength into their swords. Is this lacking as well? Although it was partial, he had acquired partial gigantification after meeting Heracles. So he thought that at the very least, he might be able to gain some advantage in strength, if not in other stats. But that wasn't the case either. Gigantification. As if he couldn't believe it, the doppelganger's face hardened even more. Chong. In the brief gap, Eugene hurriedly struck his sword and distanced himself. The doppelganger did not come any closer. Having seen the fire eyes and gigantification, there was no telling what else he might be hiding. Kick. Eugene put his sword back in its sheath. The doppelganger made a curious expression at the sight of him sheathing his weapon. What are you doing? Changing weapons. Scut. Eugene, who had sheathed the Black Knight sword, took out another sword he had been carrying. It's a bit unfair, but... A bright red blade revealed itself. Just holding it in his hand, he could feel a tingling sensation in his fingertips. Keying, I can't help it now. The Kusanagi, which had finally seen the light of day after a long time, cried out for blood. Chapter 194. The Sword of Kusanagi, a sword among swords that came from the tail of the eight-headed serpent Yamada no Orochi. It was an item that remained true to the original abilities of a sword, and it was known to be the best among all the items in the tower in terms of sharpness. The power of Kusanagi was not dependent on stats, skills, or the skills of the player wielding the sword. It simply cut when swung. Not only the opponent the sword clashed against, but also the opponent's sword made of iron would be cut down. That was the power of Kusanagi. That was why Yuan did not hold Kusanagi in his hand. This sword stopped the growth of the player holding it. But I can't help it now. Zeus was much stronger than his opponent. No, there was no comparison. His clone in front of him was nothing more than a test subject created by the mirror of Yada. Nevertheless, it was strong enough to be difficult for him to handle at the moment. Of course, Zeus was a being of a different dimension. The 9th-ranked high ranker. However, Yuan did not take out Kusanagi when fighting Zeus. Because there was no need to. There were many cases where I could have won the fight against Zeus. But now, this is all I have. The mirror of Yada was a test that Yuan did not know about. That was why he could not prepare in advance and could not find a better way. Kusanagi was no different from a cheat key in the game. So he didn't want to use it, but he didn't have to be stubborn in this situation. That sword, it's a ghost sword. The clone's eyes narrowed at the eerie energy emanating from Kusanagi and the faint magical power covering its surface. Ghost sword. It was a dangerous type of item. Ghost sword items were usually quite valuable. They were items that momentarily exploded the user's ability, and their power was far superior to other items of the same value. However, the problem was that there were many cases where players could no longer grow after being addicted to its power. Kusanagi is considered the best among ghost sword items. Yuan held Kusanagi in his hand and swung it in the air. And that guy doesn't know Kusanagi. The feeling of it fitting perfectly in his hand. The lightness of moving an empty hand. And the confidence that he could cut anything. All of these changes were due to this one Kusanagi. Among them, the sense that I could cut anything felt somewhat strange. Confidence is like a double-edged sword. It's bad if you don't have enough, but it's also bad if you have too much. Just because I'm holding the Kusanagi doesn't mean I'm invincible. I need to calmly judge my own rapidly increasing power and not rely too much on this power. That was the homework that players who held the Kusanagi had to solve. Disappointing. The doppelganger clicked his tongue and shook his head. I thought you were a decent guy, but you're just a guy who relies on that kind of thing. You're still acting tough. I'm not acting tough, I'm just being tough. That was really unfortunate. Yu-won felt his face heat up for no reason. It was his old self, but he had a really crappy personality. Well, up until then, he had hardly met any other rivals besides Sun Ogong or Heracles. I learned humility after I met Outer. Since then, his personality has changed little by little. He made friends and experienced fighting together, not alone. He also realized that he wasn't as great as he always thought he was. Yu-won faced his mirror. Really, not so much. His face felt hot. Yu-won sighed and shook the Kusanagi in his hand. You talk too much. It meant to come in quickly. The red light emanating from Yu-won's eyes grew stronger. It was a change due to the ghost sword in his hand. The doppelganger, who had been looking at the Kusanagi for a while, moved. Spot. Flash. A momentary acceleration. Yu-won's eyes followed the doppelganger's movements. But for a moment, he missed the movement. Irregular. It wasn't a special skill. It was a way to trick the opponent's eyes by making the movement momentarily faster. A movement that was naturally embedded in the body. He knew this kind of movement well. Left. Clang. The swords clashed. The impact was less than before. The Kusanagi's blade completely absorbed the impact. The doppelganger's eyebrows twitched. You're blocking it well. Swish. Clang. The doppelganger, who had deflected the swords of Arthur and Ares, who had rushed in from both sides, jumped high into the air. Flap, flap, it's getting faster. Yu-won's eyes followed the movements of the clone reflected in the mirror. The clone seemed like multiple people. It made its body look like multiple people with fast speeds, just like the Murim world's vision skill, shape-shifting. Acceleration, acceleration. It was a B rank skill, so it wasn't that great of a skill. However, before the regression, it was one of the skills that Yu-won was the best at using. In the first place, among the stats that Yu-won originally had, the highest stats besides his magic power were his senses and agility, which were the same. Here it comes. Boom. Yu-won's body caught on fire. Immense magic power surrounded him. The flames spread out like a curtain. Holy fire, protects your body. Fire eyes controls, holy fire. Swoosh. Dozens of sword strikes came flying from all directions. Each one was a powerful sword strike, so many that he wouldn't have been able to block them if he hadn't prepared beforehand. Bang, bang, boom, boom. The holy fire's curtain broke apart and then regenerated itself repeatedly. Yu-won looked at the clone on the other side from within it. Which one is real? Amidst the countless sword strikes, Yu-won's gaze followed one of the clones. Found you. Boom. Heavenly Steps is activated. Movement speed is increased by 100% for 5 seconds. You can walk on air for 5 seconds. Yu-won used the skill attached to Hermes' footsteps and left the curtain that was protecting his body. In an instant, Yu-won's movements became twice as fast, and the dozens of clones gathered into one. Swoosh. Sword strikes combined into one point. It was small in size, but it was the most powerful one yet. I am me. He knew this would happen. Since it was his future, no, his past, he knew very well about his fighting style. What skills he had and what kind of fights he got into. How he moved at times like this, and what skill he would use next. And he knew the level of Kim Yu-won, who was right before his eyes. He had figured it all out. And, I'll pierce through it. He became certain. Screech. Kusanagi let out a cry. The moment he decided to cut, the energy surrounding the sword became several times sharper. Supreme Magic Sword is activated. He didn't need any other skills. Just the magic sword that increased the sword's strength and energy was enough. Screech. Amidst the enormous bladera created by the clones, Athing Wispy and Sharpsword pierced through. Keeg. Quote exclamation mark quote. An expression of surprise apparet in the clonaceas. It seemed that it never expected Yu-won to pierce through its bladera. And naturally, it was bound to react more slowly to an unexpected situation. JJing. Yu-won's word and the clone's sword collided. The clone's body staggered for a moment from the collision of the two swords. But it was just that. After a momentary tremble, the clone steadily regained its posture. Surprised. You're not only surprised. What? Giik. A long wound appeared on the clonashik, Po. A much larger wound than before. Even with the regenerative skill, it was not an injury that easily healed. Spot. Yuan's sword began Totens again. The bright red blade crossed in several ines in the void. Feel Redierizer's sharp sword movement became even sharper with the addition of the red thread-like intertwined swords. Keeg. As soon as the blades were brandished, the red thread created in the void flew towards the clone. The clonashai swidindate the blade ori enveloping its surroundings as if to bend it. Phew. KWA. Magical power gushed out from the clone's body. Thud, 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 thud. The blue-tinged vast magical power severed the red thread. That was the moment between a single bed of swat ran from the clone's forehead, which had emitted so much magical power at once. Tick. The swat ran from its forehead froze. For a brief moment, its body froze. Chong. The frozen body to wet out. It was not easy to break free from the bending with force. Arthritis was insufficient to hold the clone's body. However, for a brief moment, that brief moment was enough. Well done, Shuaik. Airs' sword cut throat Heclone's neck. And in that moment, swish, the clonaish hand grabbed Airs' sword. What? Boom, quang, Airs' body was thrown and crashed to the ground. The clone had not let go of the sword it had grabbed, and neither had Ares. Quang, boom, boom. The hard floor Mediofiata's mirrors did not break. Airs' consciousness, which was wavering from the impact he felt in his back, slowly faded, and so on the remaining strength in his hands dissipated. Thud, thud. Ares, who was thrown to the floor like he was flying, watched as the clone threw the sword in his hand back behind him. There was a large wound in his hand. That sword isn't just an ordinary ghost sword. The clone ignored Yuan while looking at the ghost sword in Yuan's hand. Of course, if he was a player who could use a ghost sword, then his level would be obvious. But that wasn't it. What kind of item is that? Isn't it dangerous to have something like that? It wasn't a wrong statement. Right now, the clone wasn't the only one who had been cut by the sword from the battle just now. Yuan's hand was throbbing. It was a wound cut by the Kusanagi. A sword that shortens the user's lifespan. The sword's ability doesn't differentiate between enemies and allies. He thought he understood why he hated the Kusanagi so much, even though it had the grand name of the divine weapon. In order to wield this sword, he had no choice but to break the sword first. If the player couldn't overcome the sword's sharpness, then it would be impossible to even hold the sword in their hand. It would fit Susanoo well. Clang. Yuan gripped the sword again and approached the clone. The clone's eyes turned to the Kusanagi in Yuan's hand. The sword is good, but don't you know that it's not enough with that? What? You can't beat me. I'm stronger than you. Yuan nodded his head. The distance was short. At this distance, it would be possible to reach someone if they moved quickly and swung their sword. A close distance. This distance was Yuan's preferred distance. And it was the same for the clone. That's right, you're stronger than me. Originally, he should have faced an opponent that was the same as him. But maybe because of the special circumstances of having gone back in time with the clockwork, the Yada's mirror showed Yuan a clone that was stronger than himself. But, at first, he was scared. Kim Yuan in front of his eyes, his own clone. That was why he had taken out the Kusanagi without realizing it and had fought more passively than usual. But now he was sure. That's why I'm going to win. Yuan's eyes sparkled. Clang. One more step. He narrowed the distance even more, showing his confidence. There was one reason why he was so sure. You don't know me. And, I know you. Chapter 195. Step. Wu Wen took another step closer. A strange light flashed in the doppelganger's eyes. What are you trying to do? Swoosh. Arthur and Ares, who had been behind him, disappeared. The 3-on-1 battle had become a 1-on-1 battle again. It's not that I've given up. Twitch. The doppelganger's muscles moved erratically as he looked at Wu Wen. It seemed to sense something unusual. Wu Wen never moved without confidence. And so did the doppelganger. You should know by now. No matter how much it was just a doppelganger created from the mirror of Yada, Wu Wen was Wu Wen. That I am you. You can tell by crossing swords. What kind of person your opponent is. What kind of fight they fight. It wasn't the presence or absence of skills that mattered. Even if it was the same skill, it would be completely different depending on who used it. If I had that skill, perhaps the doppelganger would be thinking like this now. And perhaps, it would be horrified to think that it was so similar to itself. It couldn't help but doubt. I wonder if the Wu Wen in front of me is not the same person as me. However, even if you realize that, it didn't change anything. You don't know me. Clack. The power of a giant dwells in your body. Magic is activated. Gigantification is strengthened. Buzz. Kusanagi drew a trajectory. As the sharp blade flew, the doppelganger swung its sword to meet it. Clang. The first clash. The two swords that had been repelled clashed again and again. Clang, clank, clang. Peesh, pfft. What was clashing were swords and swords, but what was being cut was skin. The doppelganger's face and body were covered in wounds. The same was true of Wu Wan's body. Are you trying to die together? No. Bang, bang, bang. Wu Wan drew even more magic into the Kusanagi. You're the only one who's going to die. Bang. Clang. The doppelganger's body was pushed back a step. It was to get away from the Kusanagi's blade. I can't beat him in strength. The doppelganger racked its brain. It looked for something it was better at. The judgment was not difficult. I'm faster. With the gigantification, their strength was about the same. The same went for their magic. However, in terms of speed alone, it had a clear advantage. In order to gain the upper hand in the battle, it had to use its advantage. Spot. The doppelganger disappeared. Swish. Wu Wan's eyes moved. In the cave made of mirrors, he could see the doppelganger moving. Not from the front, but from the side. That meant one thing. You're going to use speed. It was amazing at this point. No matter how much it was itself, how could it think so similarly? I would have done the same thing. However, you don't know. Whoosh. Wagon. Reads the path. Clang. He pushed away the sword that flew in from the side. The Kusanagi let out a sharp cry and drew another trajectory. Peesh. Pfft. Thud. The doppelganger's chest was cut open. Unlike the wounds on its hands or cheeks, it was the first proper wound. What kind of power does this eye have? Thud. The doppelganger took a step back. Wu Wan, on the other hand, moved closer to the doppelganger. How well I know myself. Crash, clang, screech. The tip of the sword cut the mirror. The blade of the Kusanagi created a wound on the mirrored wall, and then it cut the neck of the doppelganger who had run away next to it. Clang. The doppelganger's eyes wavered as it barely managed to block the sword strike with the hilt of its sword. Right after that, buzz, bang, the doppelganger's body flew far away and crashed into the opposite wall. The doppelganger, which had been staggering, hurriedly swung its sword and cut at Wu Wan, who was running straight at it. Screech, whoosh, he thought he had cut it for sure. But he hadn't, but it wasn't. The doppelganger did not stop the blood flowing from its waist. It was really a close call. Wu Wan had already started moving before the doppelganger could swing its sword. How on earth? Question marks continued to appear in the doppelganger's mind. It was clear that its speed was much faster. However, strangely enough, the opponent was not caught. It felt as if all of his movements were being read. Really, is that guy me? If the opponent was exactly the same as him, as it appeared on the outside, that would be enough. He wasn't stupid enough not to know himself. But then why, me? If that was the case, he should have been the same. He should have been able to anticipate the opponent's movements and fight accordingly. Just like right now, if that guy is me. Wu Wan's figure, rushing towards him, entered the doppelganger's eyes. Here it is. Clang. The doppelganger exerted strength into the baekya in its hand. It was not good for this fight to become a long-term battle. As time passed, it felt as if his movements were being read more and more. Kwang. With the release of magic power, the doppelganger unleashed several sword strikes. He activated his sensory field to the limit and predicted the opponent's movements. He observed the visible figure and the subtle movements of the muscles, and he moved assuming that the opponent was truly him. It was only for a short while. During that short while, the doppelganger calculated Wu Wan's movements. But, Wang, nothing was cut. See, pit, a burning sensation was felt from his waist. I told you I would win. Chuak, hup, blood poured out as his side was cut. It was quite a deep wound. If he tried to move recklessly right now, the wound would only get worse. Thud, the doppelganger dropped the sword it was holding. It needed to recover. Super regeneration is activated. Cannot be recovered. The doppelganger's eyes widened. Why, it couldn't recover. This was the first time this had happened. Even if it was dark magic power that interfered with recovery, it was a skill that could recover. Only once a day, but super regeneration allowed for rapid recovery in a short period of time. Then why, on earth? The doppelganger's eyes caught sight of the sword in Wu Wan's hand. Is it because of that sword? A crimson blade that emitted an unpleasant magical power. That sword was definitely not ordinary. He had never even heard of a sword that emitted such a great amount of murderous intent that it could even cut its user. The doppelganger realized, he could not win this fight. Let me just ask one thing. What is it? Are you really me? The doppelganger, who had never understood until now, finally asked the question he had been holding inside. And that moment, because I am you, swish, Yuan's hand grabbed the handle of another sword. I know about this too. Quote exclamation mark quote, a sword handle floating in the air. It was the baekje that the doppelganger had dropped to the floor. Swordsmanship, it was quite a difficult technique. It was one of the martial arts techniques that used magic power to float a sword in the air and move it at will. It was not very efficient because it consumed too much magic power, but it was not a bad skill for assassination. That was why Yuan always saved this skill as his last resort. Clang, the baekje, which had left Yuan's hand, fell to the floor. The doppelganger watched its figure quietly. Even his last resort didn't work. The doppelganger's pupils shook greatly before calming down. So it's real. The doppelganger had no choice but to admit it. Yuan, who was in front of him, was himself. And that meant one thing. Am I a fake? At that murmur, Yuan made a slightly surprised expression. As expected, he was like him. To notice that this was a test, even in this situation. I knew that one of us was fake. At first, I naturally thought it was you. But it was strange from the middle. The clone didn't stop the blood flowing from his waist. The wound caused by Kusanagi, far from stopping, was getting bigger. He didn't stop the wound anymore. It was hard to admit. But now that I've come this far, I can't help but admit it. Swoosh, the clone picked up the sword that had fallen to the ground. Yuan watched him quietly. He no longer felt any fighting spirit from the clone. The clone's sword was held in reverse. That moment. PFF'd, he opened his mouth, his heart pierced in the center of his chest. You're real. Yuan's face was reflected in the clone's eyes. Through the short fight, he realized it clearly. This fight was a fight he had lost. And it was a fight he had to lose. I don't know what you're trying to do. His eyes gradually blurred. His voice trembled thinly, losing strength. Win, please. His eyes didn't close. Blurred focus. The clone's eyes became cloudy and his figure gradually became transparent. Yuan bowed his head and looked down at the floor. His reflection was once again in the mirror, where nothing had been visible just a moment ago. You have passed the test of Yada. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The cave shook. The ground and walls shook violently as if they were about to collapse. Yuan watched the mirrors disappear inside. The test is over. The test of the mirror was to defeat one's clone reflected in the mirror. At first, he was confused when it was not his present self, but his past self that appeared. Could he really defeat that guy? Even if it wasn't exactly the same, he was stronger than he was now in all abilities. Rather, it was fortunate. What if the opponent who came out through the mirror was his present self? The probability of winning and losing would have been 50-50. But because it wasn't, he was able to bet more confidently. Moreover, he realized one thing through this incident. I still haven't accepted it. It had been several years since he had come to the past using the clockwork. He had been quite busy and thought he was faithful to the present. Hephaestus, Merlin, Hercules, and even Son Goku, though a clone. That's why he thought it was okay. If you ever go back, there is no way to come back again. Kronos, the father of Olympus who created the clockwork with Odin and gave birth to the three gods, including Zeus. So whoever goes back, live your best life there. Don't leave any regrets here. It was what he said when he first revealed the clockwork to everyone. And whether it was a delusion or not, Yuan felt as if Kronos was looking at him at that time. Maybe he had his eye on him since then. It's not easy. Somehow, it didn't go as he wished. The time he lived before the regression was as long as 1,000 years, and the life he had lived since returning was still too short to compare to it. There were too many regrets to just throw it all away. His mood softened. It was an estrangement he had never felt before after returning using the clockwork. A strange feeling. That feeling was broken by a sudden sound. Clang. A sound from the spot where the clone had been transparent. Yuan looked in the direction of the sound. You have acquired the Mirror of Yada. A circular shield made of a transparent mirror. Ooh. With its appearance, the Kusanagi in his hand trembled slightly. I finally found it. The sword of Kusanagi, the Yasukani no Magatama. And the last of the three artifact. As the cave returned to its original form, the Mirror of Yada appeared before his eyes. Chapter 196. Amaterasu walked around the middle of the room. She was restless and seemed to be waiting for something anxiously. Creak. She gritted her teeth and made a sound. She looked out the window and saw only a cloudy sky. It looked the same as usual. Are you playing with me? Player Kid was still quiet with no response. Kim Yuan, who had gone in search of the Yata mirror, had not been heard from. In this case, there were two possibilities. He had gotten his hands on the Yata mirror and gone into hiding, or he was dead. However, Amaterasu strangely didn't think that Yuan was dead. It was a baseless guess, but her instincts told her so. When she first met him, Kim Yuan seemed like someone who could become a high ranker, or maybe even someone who could reach the top 20 or top 10. There was no way such a person was dead. The reason he couldn't be contacted was probably because he had gotten his hands on the Yata mirror. Even so, how could a mere player betray me? She knew Yuan's abilities well. She had heard the rumors and knew that he had won his fight with Ares. From what she had seen in person, she thought he was pretty good. But even so, he was still far from being able to beat her. Furthermore, he didn't seem like the type of person who would make the wrong choice out of greed. If so, there was only one reason. Asgard. It was because he believed in his background. He must have stabbed her in the back, believing in the sturdy shield that was Asgard. Do you think you can do as you please? The Yata mirror had to be in her hands. She had roughly figured out where Susanoo's relic was. She had found out that he had disappeared from the first floor at the last moment, so it was almost as if she had already found it. But what if the Yata mirror ended up in Asgard's hands? That can't happen. Click, click, Amaterasu hurriedly tapped on player kit. Then she sent a message to the other players and rankers stored in player kit on the 44th floor. Keep an eye on the surroundings of the test site. Don't let Kim Yuan go up to the next floor at all costs. Kim Yuan would definitely try to go up to the next floor. He was a player with brilliant talent. He had talent that made even high rankers, and even rankers, seem insignificant. No, he already possessed the strength of a high ranker. It wouldn't be difficult to find him if he just kept a close watch on the testing site. Everyone has the same greed for what's above them. He knew all too well the greed of players who aimed for the top. He used to be like that in the past, and so did everyone else. That was why he could be certain. That guy is definitely on this floor. Didn't you go to the 44th floor? Thud. Hercules brought out tea. Yuan looked at the small teacup in his large hand like it was a toy and asked in wonder. It's strange that you like tea. Strange? What do you mean? You look like you could drink a whole barrel of beer. You shouldn't judge people by their appearance. Yuan sat across from Hercules at the table in the cabin and drank the tea that Hercules had handed him. In the quiet forest, after the battle with Olympus, Hercules had returned to his home and spent his time cutting down trees. Swish! Someone pulled a chair back and sat down next to Yuan. Yuan turned his head and saw Pandora drinking the tea he had set down and asked. How's Pandora doing? Is she okay? Pandora had been following Yuan around. This time was no different. In order to get rid of Pandora, Yuan had left her with Hercules. He had no choice at the time. But now, as if she couldn't bear to be separated, Pandora was always by Yuan's side. It seems like she's still a little hesitant to meet people. It's probably because of Zeus. Hercules quickly brought out tea for Pandora as well. Here you go, drink this. Okay. Pandora stared at the teacup that Hercules had handed her and nodded. Her expression, as she looked at Yuan, had changed a little. It was as if she was resenting him for leaving her behind. She seems to be showing more expression these days. She's been like that ever since you suddenly disappeared. She seems to be getting better little by little. That's good. For Pandora's sake, if you have time, come visit us often. I don't know if you're the cure, or if the little guy next to you is the cure, but she needs you. I was planning on staying here for a while anyway. Gulp. Hercules, who had been about to sit down, froze in surprise at the unexpected answer. Here, why, can't you? I have a lot of money. Why are you being stingy with your words? No, that's not what I meant. Heracles, who had been hesitating for a moment, continued his words. Weren't you going to continue going up? I heard that your goal is the top of this ceiling. Yuan was different from other rankers. Even Heracles K knew that much. That's why I thought you would continue to climb the tower. Even more now that the war with Olympus was over, he would say that wouldn't stop. I need to go up. Keep going. But why? I have a small fight ahead of me. A fight? Yuan explained thought that happened so far to Heracles, who looked puzzled. Floor 44. The world of criminals. The three evils and the three sacred treasures. Yuan pulled out the Kusanagi no Tsurugi sword and the Yata mirror and placed them onto the table. So, the seer one of those three sacred treasures. Heracles rarely showed a surprised expression. He examined the Kusanagi no Tsurugi sword and the Yata mirror. A strange sensation was transmitted to his fingertips. It was definitely not an ordinary item. You've managed to obtain attempts like this. I just somehow did. They don't seem like items you can just somehow obtain. That's right. The 3 sacred treasures were the items that the 3 evils had teamed up to find, but they had only managed to obtain 1. But Yuan had managed to obtain 2 of the 3 sacred treasures. Of the 3 evils, Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi remain, right? I don't know about Tsukuyomi, but I remember Amaterasu being quite high in the rankings. Amaterasu is ranking was higher than the other 2 sacred treasurers, excluding Zeus. No matter how great Yuan's skills were, she was a difficult opponent to deal with right now. Should I help you? Me. Heracles' eyes gleamed ferociously. They were a saw someone who enjoyed battle, an unexpected response. He had always disliked fighting, but now he was volunteering to help fight. I wonder if he'll accept even if I ask him to. He hesitated for a moment. Things would be easy if they had Heracles a help. Heracles was currently ranked in the top 20, far higher than the 3 evils. With his strength, this fight against them 3 evils wouldn't be difficult. But, it was best for Heracles to stay here for now. He needed the right items. He was the one who had taken down the top-ranked high rankers with his bare body, without anything, without any items. The reason he was able to become a high ranker within the top 10 was because he had gotten his hands on items that suited him. This guy has to stay here for a while. He had to finish this on his own. If he really needed Hercules' help, he would have to accept it, but at least not for this. Alright, I'll do it myself. Won't it be hard on your own? There's a way. Hercules made a curious expression at Yuan's confident reply. Yuan asked, seeing his expression. Why, it's obviously going to be a ridiculous fight. So, you seem like you'll win. For some reason. Yuan was the one who had led the war against Olympus to victory. Even if he didn't have any help this time, his opponent was too different. The 3-eyed was nothing compared to Olympus or Zeus. Even though Amaterasu was a bit dangerous, he thought he would be able to win somehow. But if you're going to fight, why are you waiting here? I need time to fight properly. Time, I have something I left behind. I have to stay until that's finished. There was only one thing he was waiting for. Until the item he had left with Hephaestus was finished. He didn't know if it would take a few days or a few months. It might even take a few years if it took too long. That was why Yuan had chosen this place. So please take care of me for a while. It might be a bit long. This was Hercules' home, a place that not even the 3-eyed of the heavens would dare to invade. So this was perfect, and during that time, creak. Yuan, who had finished his tea, got up from his seat and asked. Can you help me with something? Swish. Yuan and Hercules ran far away from the cabin. Pandora sat far away from the 2 and ate her snack. It seemed like Hercules had bought it to feed her. You're practicing giant transformation? Yep. How do you do that? As you know, my giant transformation is still young. Yuan thought back to the first time he had encountered Hercules' giant transformation. I should learn from you, who's like an adult. Gigantification was a skill that only Hercules possessed in this tower. Naturally, there weren't many clues about gigantification. Furthermore, Wu Yun had no reason to meet a giant right now. Even if you say that, I have nothing to teach you. You don't have to teach me. Then what do you want me to do? Fight me. Wu Yun did not pull out his sword. He stood face to face with Hercules with only his bare body. Seeing Wu Yun like that, Hercules laughed in disbelief. You want to fight me with your fists right now? Don't worry about it. Don't kill me, just fight me. Don't kill you. Hercules chewed on those words for a moment, clenching and unclenching his fists a few times. And then the next moment. Boom, Hercules, fist shot forward. ZZZZT. I could feel the magic power emanating from his fist pressing down on my body. I barely managed to hold back the rising tide of my body, and the next moment, I felt like my insides were being turned upside down. Ah, cuck. Blood spurted out of Wu Yun's mouth. It felt like all the organs in my stomach were bursting. The moment that feeling continued, the shape of my body collapsed with it. Crash, thud, z's. The ground began to cave in. As the ground collapsed, Wu Yun's body fell down into it. In front of Hercules, outstretched fist. A huge cliff appeared in front of it. Hercules looked back and forth between his fist and the cliff below. A punch using gigantification. It was a skill that he didn't need to use very often. Other than the gigantomachi or a fight with Zeus, there were rarely any fights that warranted the use of gigantification. Don't kill you. He once again chewed on Wu Yun's request in his mouth. I'm sorry, but that's difficult. Present. Poseidon 72nd place. Hades 61st place. Susano 57th place deceased. Amaterasu 52nd place, Hercules 21st place, Zeus 9th place, Kim Woo-yun, X. Future, Poseidon 43rd place, Hades 34th place, Susano 57th place deceased, Amaterasu 13th place, Hercules 4th place, Zeus 5th place, Kim Woo-yun 4th place. Chapter 197. Thud. Boom. Heracles, fist slammed into the floor. The floor cracked and Uran's body staggered, and then his fist shot forward. Crack. It struck Heracles' jaw directly. It was a fist that had used gigantification. Despite that, Heracles' neck didn't even turn. Groan. It was Uran's hand that hurt instead. So hard. How could a human body be this hard? Those eyes are still annoying. Flicker. Flames of fury flickered in Uran's eyes. Uran used that to dodge Heracles' fist. Since each blow was so threatening, Uran had no choice but to dodge Heracles' fists. Swish. Then, Heracles' hand grabbed Uran's arm. At the same time, Uran's eyes widened as he tried to put some distance between them again. Boom. A fist came flying. He couldn't dodge this. Boom. Fist met fist. Not only the fist, but the entire right arm that swung it was hit by the impact. Gigantification. Screams. Buzz. His entire arm trembled. It wasn't easy to just endure that fist without using any skill. Boom. Uran's body flew away, and Heracles withdrew his fist. We'll stop here for today. It was the first proper clash. However, Uran's body was already riddled with wounds from that one clash. Heracles, gigantification wasn't a skill that Uran's body could withstand. I can do more. With your current health, you won't be able to withstand my fist. Next time, it won't end with just one arm. Tisk. Uran clicked his tongue. His anger was brief, and the excitement of battle quickly cooled. He was right. In his current state, he couldn't withstand Heracles' fist. It wasn't just a matter of gigantification proficiency, but also a difference in strength and stamina stats. Just how high are his strength and stamina? Actually, Heracles' magic power wasn't that great. It wasn't anything special compared to other high rankers. Despite that, Heracles was later ranked among the top 10 high rankers. There was one reason: his brute strength and stamina. As strong as the strongest body in the tower, Heracles' physique was unrivaled. The proficiency of gigantification increases. Gigantification evolves one level. It wasn't without results. After his duel with Heracles, Yu-1 learned how to handle gigantification from him. Gigantification is about using your muscles. Muscles. Yeah, how? You put your strength here in like this, bam. And, who? Quote. Words that were hard to understand at all. Although he was better than anyone at gigantification, he didn't have much talent when it came to teaching. In the end, Yu-1 had no choice but to learn gigantification through the feeling that Heracles was talking about. He may not have been a great teacher, but, good grief, finally. Yu-1 let out a sigh. It had already been a month since he had entered Heracles' house and began living with him. Even though he wasn't a good teacher, Heracles, who was thought to be at least decent, was a complete mess as a teacher. Fortunately, there were still many things to gain from fighting with him. 3 rounds again today. Thud, thud. Heracles uncrossed his arms. At first, he was creeped out by that appearance, but he had gotten used to it by now. You're not bad. A month. It wasn't a short amount of time. However, during that time, Yu-1 had never properly received one of Heracles' punches. But you know the tricks well. The giant's strength fills your entire body. Groan. At some point, Yu-1 stopped using his other skills. For the past month, Yu-1 had focused solely on gigantification. Unlike before, he fought Heracles purely in hand-to-hand combat. During that time, Yu-1 had only one goal: to become Heracles. That was what Yu-1 thought was the best way to master gigantification. It'll be a little different this time. There was only one thing that Yu-1 had realized about gigantification during that time. As with most skills, the best way to master gigantification was to use it often and for a long time. Also, gigantification continued to evolve whenever it was stimulated repeatedly. The giant's strength fills your entire body. The giant's strength fills your right arm. You have manifested the giant's arm. Creak, groan. The magic power of gigantism that had spread throughout his body was concentrated in his right arm. Heracles' eyes sparkled at the change in the magic power flowing through Yu-1's body. You've used your head quite a bit. It's different from partial gigantism. Partial gigantism, like the beginning of gigantism, is when one cannot achieve full-body gigantism and uses gigantism partially. However, the gigantism that Yu-1 used now was not such a rudimentary one. It was several times more powerful than the full-body gigantism, as the power of the gigantism spread throughout his body was concentrated in one arm. Of course, gulp, but the burden on the body will be that much greater. The burden on Yu-1's right arm was visible. The cells in his right arm screamed. Due to excessive overload, his arm began to deteriorate. There wasn't much time. Let's go. Clank. Yu-1 moved toward Heracles. And the next moment, whoosh, quang, the fists of the two collided. Yu-1's eyes saw the ceiling. His arm was tattered, with blood vessels bursting and bones broken. His mind was awake, but he couldn't move, perhaps because of his arm. Ignorant. Next to him, Pandora, who was applying medicine to Yu-1's arm, opened her mouth. Simple. The order seems to be reversed. Did she mean to say that he was simply ignorant? No other refutation came to mind. Lately, even Yu-1 thought he was really simple and ignorant. And that was Heracles' style. Talk. Pandora closed the box containing the herbs and potions. She had applied quite expensive herbs. After being together for the past month, Pandora had proven to be quite skilled in medicine. 3 days. It will take about 3 days. Pandora didn't answer. Silence was soon affirmation. It's impossible. I'll try. Yu-1 closed his eyes as if he were dead. Pandora, who had been looking at Yu-1 for a while, got up from her seat and went outside. Pandora, who had taken the box containing the herbs, approached Heracles, who was waiting outside. How is he? Is he okay? No. Was it too much? Heracles scratched his head with an awkward face at Yu-1's injury. He should have controlled his strength to some extent, but he seemed to have gotten too excited without realizing it. Sniff. Pandora opened the box containing the herbs again. Pandora reopened the box containing the herbs. Heracles no longer considered the playground as a simple player. When she realized that her gaze was directed at the wound on his fist, Heracles quickly shook his head. No, that's okay. I'll just leave it alone and it'll heal. But still, it's okay, I said. Pandora nodded at his adamant refusal. Surely, for a high ranker like Heracles, this wound was nothing. As the stamina stat increased, not only did the body become stronger, but the recovery power also increased accordingly. Heracles looked at the wound, clenching and unclenching his fist a few times. I never thought I'd get hurt by the same gigantism. He didn't understand. It was clear that he didn't think he would get hurt until the moment of impact. Various items, including lightning bolts, and various skills, such as pacification. If all those means were mobilized, it wouldn't matter, but the only thing Yu-1 used was gigantism. Bam! Sweat beaded on Heracles' hand as he clenched his fist. I've never been hurt fighting giants before. But the bruise between his fists and the skin that had burst from the strong impact. It was a wound caused by the impact of hitting his fist with Yu-1's. I wonder if I'm raising a monster. Monster. Heracles' head turned at Pandora's voice. It seemed that he had muttered too loudly. Oh, did you hear that? Yeah, you know, right, when did that guy come to the tower? It was a sudden thought. It had only been a few years since Yu-1 had entered the tower. For an ordinary player, it was a time to go around the 10th floor. I didn't teach him properly. I didn't learn gigantism, and I didn't learn it and bring it up to this point. It's all something that guy learned and learned. Are you worried? A little bit. What? At Pandora's question, Heracles thought about the anxiety that had arisen while looking at Yu-1. What that guy is looking at is something bigger than Olympus. He's looking at something bigger. Olympus and the Three Kings are just passing gates. Yu-1 was definitely a great player. So much so that he had no history. Even his father, Zeus, or Odin, the great ranker of Asgard, were no match for Yu-1 as a child. Heracles no longer considered Yu-1 as a mere player. He was really looking far ahead. So far ahead that he couldn't even guess how far. Still, that guy doesn't tell me what he's preparing for. I can't see what he's fighting against. Heracles recalled his fight with Olympus. He was not afraid even in front of Zeus. Even though he had won against the great ranker, Yu-1 did not seem to have achieved his goal. That's why Heracles was even more anxious. It's not just about getting stronger. I don't see the greed that players who are obsessed with power have in that guy. Then, he has a goal that is so urgent that he can't rest for a day. But I don't know what that goal is. A goal that would make even a player of Kim Woo-yeon's level impatient. A goal so great that it would make him pass through the great king of Olympus, Zeus. Heracles did not know what that obscure something was. Creak. That's it. What is that? The closed door opened, and Woo-yeon, who had been listening to the story inside, came out. Wu Yun moved with a bandage wrapped around his arm, where he had applied herbs. Are you okay not to rest? With that body? It's just my arm that's hurt, so what's the big deal about moving? No, recover. Are you going to meddle too? It was true that he needed to rest to recover. In Wu Yun's current arm condition, even a player with excellent resilience would need more than a few days to recuperate. Of course, Wu Yun knew that fact well. He didn't like moving around too much because of his injuries. But, okay, I'm not going to fight. That didn't mean he could just lie still now. Because the moment he had been waiting for had come. Heracles, eyes lit up at Wu Yun's words. Where are you going? It's a bit sooner than expected. Wu Yun took out his player kit with his unharmed left hand and showed it forward. I think I need to go down to the first floor. And one letter floating above it. Hephaestus, it is complete. Chapter 198. Walking down to the first floor took quite a while. Pandora and Heracles stuck close to Yu-Won on either side. The two of them stuck so close to his side that the sun's chariot felt wide and empty. Did you really have to come with me? Well, we're curious. What did you make? It was natural for them to be curious. One of the items that Yu-Won had Hephaestus make for him contained a thunderbolt. It was an item that was practically a symbol of Olympus. On top of that, one of the materials used was the Stone of the Sea, which Poseidon had been so desperately looking for. Combining all of those items into one, it wasn't easy to imagine what kind of item it would have turned into. Same here. Yu-Won naturally understood Heracles' curiosity. Yu-Won also wanted to get there as soon as possible. Yu-Won grabbed the reins of the sun's chariot and suddenly asked, remembering something. Speaking of which, what happened to the Apollo twins? The Apollo twins were said to have been purged by Zeus before the all-out battle with Zeus began. There hadn't been any news about the two siblings, who had been missing for some time, but they came to mind when he saw the sun's chariot. It seems they were being held in the dungeon under Zeus's temple, and my uncle freed them. I don't know about Artemis, but it seems Apollo is in pretty bad shape. They must have gotten pretty hurt. That's probably the case. They both risked their lives to fight. Despite being twins, the two of them wielded different attributes of fire and ice and were known to possess outstanding skills, to the point where they were said to be comparable to a high god when fighting together. As such, the two of them didn't just sit by and let Zeus purge them. Anyway, they're alive. Yes, that's good. Yu-Won sighed in relief. His face was that of someone who had been relieved of a burden. Did you know them? No, it's funny how you worry about others. What do you think of me? Well, you don't seem to cry very easily. A person should be a little more calculating. Calculating. Yu-Won chewed on the words in his mouth and nodded. That's true to some extent. He hadn't heard the term, calculating, very often. However, that was what Yu-Won had to be right now. He had come back after finishing all of his calculations in the first place. Who to abandon and who to take with him. Who to kill and who to spare. Yu-Won had followed his will. However, that didn't mean that he didn't care about those who had been left behind. If I had taken the Apollo twins with me, they're not people you should be worrying about. Yu-Won turned his head at Heracles' words. Those two entered the tower long before you, and they climbed to the top long before you. They aren't people you should be burdened with. His heart melted a little. His chest, which had felt heavy with the burden, felt a little lighter. So you don't have to take on too much. I don't know what you're carrying, but I know that. That was how it should have been. Yu-Won was still a player who hadn't even become a ranker yet. He was supposed to receive the protection of the Bureau and safely climb the tower by taking tests. He was still too young to get involved in the tower's major events. However, those were words that Heracles could say because he didn't know about the existence of the hourglass. Sometimes I think that way when I look at you. Yu-Won looked at Heracles, who was holding the reins of the sun's chariot instead of him, with his arms crossed. You should have been the one to come instead of me. If it had been Heracles instead of him, wouldn't he have been able to embrace everyone? Wouldn't he have been able to take everyone with him without anyone dying or getting hurt? But even so, Heracles' words were a great comfort to him. On the way down to the first floor, the path was quite long. Danpeng climbed onto Yuan's shoulder and pulled at his cheek. The guy who had been asleep for a long time had finished his long hibernation and couldn't contain his energy. PFF'd. Yuan's cheek was pulled hard. Watching Danpeng, who had been playing around for several days, Yuan asked in a half-giving-up voice. Is it fun? Abba, yeah, I guess it's fun. It's so tiring to deal with a kid like this. I'd rather fight the demons, it'd be 100 times less tiring. It was a new experience to find swordsmanship so easy. Clank. Is this it? Hercules discovered a small workshop at the end of Yuan's steps. It's smaller than I thought. The facilities seem clean though. Hephaestus' workshop was a little away from the city center on the first floor. The location wasn't bad, and the facilities weren't bad either, but it didn't seem impressive enough for the best blacksmith in the tower to use. It's just like you, hung. Clang, creak, Hercules opened the door of the workshop. An unnatural sound. Yuan asked at the sound coming from the door's gap. Wasn't the door locked? It was definitely a locked door. But when Hercules applied a little force to open the doorknob broke. I guess I should call a repairman first. Hercules, who had a cool expression, headed straight to the stairs leading to the basement. The heat in the workshop was hotter than ever. I definitely heard that it was finished. There's no sign of anyone. Yuan hurried down the stairs. The floor was a mess. How many tools had been used? Several hammers were broken and scattered on the floor. Hephaestus was lying in the middle of it. Hung. Hercules hurried over and lifted Hephaestus up. Hephaestus, who had been lying down, slowly opened his eyes and rolled his eyes to look at Hercules, Yuan, and Pandora. Oh, it's you guys. Hercules made a blank expression for a moment at the sight of Hephaestus yawning and rubbing his eyes. Looking at his surroundings, he seemed to have collapsed, but it seemed that he had just been sleeping deeply. Why did you all come rushing in like this? You're so noisy. Hephaestus shook his head once and began to pick up the broken hammers scattered on the floor. Yuan helped Hephaestus and asked with a worried expression. Aren't you pushing yourself too hard? I did push myself too hard. I haven't slept a wink since that day. Not a wink? You mean to say you've been working this whole time? It was so fun that I couldn't sleep. I even started to get high later on. There were thick dark circles under Hephaestus' eyes. It was amazing that someone as high-ranking as him could end up in this state just from lack of sleep. How many days and nights had he been absorbed in his work? Follow me. The item is inside. Clank. Hephaestus, who got up yawning, turned around and headed straight for the warehouse. It seemed that he wanted to show the item to Yuan as soon as possible. Yuan was just as impatient. I'll finally be able to know. His heart was beating fast for the first time in a long time. Be it Thunderbolt, Quine, or Triangle. They were all items that Yuan knew to some extent. But this time it was different. It was a completely new item that had never appeared in the tower before. More than anything, he thought that this time he would finally be able to know for sure who the guy was. Creak. The tightly closed door of the warehouse opened. Normally, he would have looked around to see what items were scattered around, but this time he didn't even think about it. Yuan followed Hephaestus straight to the gauntlet located in the center of the warehouse. It is customary to give a new name to a newly created item. Hephaestus reached out to the gauntlet inside the transparent glass case. But that's not what happened. The moment it was completed, a new name was given to it. PSSSSHT. His hand sprang back. As you can see, it has an ego as well. I already knew that it had an ego. The thunderbolt that Zeus had was choosing its own master. It was similar to an ego with a mind of its own, yet a bit different. Unconscious. It seemed like it had an unconscious mind. An item that had a will but was unstable. The thunderbolt was definitely an item that even I was seeing for the first time. All I did was make it one out of the three forms that it was split into. The item that was originally one had been split into three, and by making it one again, it found its original name. It wasn't an unexpected story. Items with different but similar forms. It was quite a cliché story that it had originally been one. Furthermore, I had known from the moment I first obtained the Black Divine Stone that it was originally one. That guy had been telling me consistently that I needed to gather all three. What is its name? I looked at the opaque colored gem embedded in the center of the glove. The three colors had combined, and its color had disappeared. The heart of Oranos. Oranos. My eyes wavered. Whether he knew it or not, Hephaestus continued to explain, circling the item that he had made. I don't know what Oranos is, but from my experience, the system never lies. Hephaestus' gaze turned to me then. You handled the thunderbolt, right? You handled the other two as well. After this guy was completed, it kept rejecting me. It was as if it had a different master. Thud. I took a step closer to the heart of Oranos. You are the master of this guy. The interior of the storage became quiet. Hephaestus put some distance between us. Heracles looked on with interest, his eyes shining as he looked between me and the heart of Oranos. I came right up to the heart of Oranos. Oranos. A name that had been decided from the beginning. This item was originally someone's heart. Does no one know? Everyone else might not remember, but I remembered that name. The one who had told me about it was Cronus. My father was a tyrant. It was a long time ago. It was something Cronus had said while he was drunk. He ate his siblings to increase his power. He ate our great-uncle Pontus, and he devoured the giants who were imprisoned in Tartarus. That was the worst history hidden in Olympus. Ouranos, who existed at the deep, thick root of Olympus, ate everything in Olympus and eventually began to eat his own children. I had to fight to survive. To catch him, I gathered all of the rankers in Olympus, Odin from Asgard, Vishnu from Veda, all of the rankers who had existed since ancient times. It was a huge war against a single being. So much time had passed that it had become faint, but the figures of those who had participated in that battle remained clearly in their minds. Did you win? In the end, you did win, right? You're alive, and so is Odin. Still, half of the rankers who participated in that battle died. I reached out towards the heart of Ouranos. That's what kind of being my father was. A sad anecdote, but that was why I couldn't help but be drawn to this item. Zeus, don't make me laugh. That little punk. My chest pounded. The worst and the strongest. He was the true heaven of Olympus. As if I had heard Cronus' voice. Whoosh, my hand grasped the heart of Ouranos. Chapter 199. The background was as white as drawing paper. It was as if someone had erased the world with an eraser. Yuan, who had fallen alone in it, turned his head and looked around. Are you here? It was a familiar voice. Yuan turned his head and was startled and almost stepped back without realizing it. It was because the face was as familiar as the voice. Zeus. He had dazzling blonde hair and a handsome face. His sharp and narrow jawline and golden eyes that went well with his hair were definitely the same face as Zeus that Yuan knew. Has my grandson grown this much already? He looks a lot like me. He stroked his face with a proud face. Grandson. From that one word, Yuan could tell the identity of the man in front of him. Are you Uranus? I feel like I've seen you a few times already, but it seems like this is my first time seeing you. Yuan had definitely seen him before. At first, it was just an eye, and then he couldn't see his face properly. It was the first time he had seen his face so clearly like this. I couldn't see your face properly back then. I didn't know your name either. Of course, it's natural that you don't know my face. Still, my face is exactly like my grandson's, so it's not that unfamiliar, right? Uranus laughed heartily and sat down. 2 chairs were placed in the space where there was nothing but a pure white background. Sit comfortably. This is my house, so you're a guest. Rook. As he said that, Uranus began to drink tea that was steaming hot. When he suddenly created an object he wanted, it was as if Uranus in front of him was a god. I've been here for a long time, so I've adapted to it. It's not that great, it's just a small space, so don't look at me like that. He didn't seem hostile. His face and voice resembled Zeus, but his speech and eyes did not. Yuan sat down across from Uranus and asked. Uranus, right, yes. Do you know Cronus? Uranus's eyebrows twitched at Yuan's question. Cronus. His brows furrowed deeply as if he was thinking about something. Cronus was a question that Yuan had always wanted to ask since his regression. Cronus's existence has been erased from this world. And that was the side effect of the clockwork. Cronus was forgotten in everyone's minds. Cronus, the father of the 3 brothers including Zeus, was never mentioned by anyone in this world. So then, what about Uranus? He was purged by the rankers, including his son Cronus. So maybe he might remember Cronus. However, anyway, you worked hard to collect the pieces. I didn't think you'd be able to collect this, especially the first one. It was an answer that had nothing to do with the question. Yuan, who had expected a little, sighed. So it's this kind of reaction. After returning using the clockwork, Yuan asked several people about Cronus. Before the regression, Cronus was a fairly well-known ancient ranker. He was purged by Zeus and imprisoned and forgotten, but there were many people who remembered his name. Nevertheless, there was no one in the present day who remembered Cronus. No, they didn't try to remember. When Cronus is mentioned, they avoid the conversation. The flow of the conversation becomes unnatural, like a broken machine, and it gets cut off. He thought that Uranus might be different. If he was of the same bloodline, and if he existed in an item that wasn't a living being. Maybe he might remember Cronus, and he had expectations for that. It can't be helped if he doesn't know. No longer was there any meaning in talking about Cronus. It was time to focus on Uranus, who was right before his eyes. Is this your heart? Yuan held out the glove in his hand. More accurately, the heart of Uranus is embedded in the glove. It's similar. It's like a heart. An ambiguous answer. Then it's not a heart. It's embedded in my chest, and it also supplies me with blood, so it must be a heart. Speak clearly. It was my everything. A gem like the one Yuan had appeared above Uranus's hand. A gem with an opaque color. The heart of Uranus. Even though it was nothing more than a form created by Uranus, Yuan looked at it with a serious expression. For this, I devoured my brethren and desired more. Why did you do that? Greed becomes uncontrollable at some point. I wished for a little more power, and before I knew it, I had become a monster. Yuan looked at the heart of Uranus that he was holding in his hand. This heart grew by devouring my brethren. What are you trying to say? What Uranus said was a story that he already knew about through Kronos. Rather than such trivial stories, Yuan wanted more certain words. Uranus appeared before his eyes as soon as the heart was completed. There must be a reason why he, who was no longer a person of this world, appeared before him by borrowing the power of an item. You're quite impatient. Well, I don't have much time either. Uranus nodded and soon spoke with a forceful voice. Be careful of becoming a monster. Anyone can become a monster. A monster. It was a difficult phrase to accept depending on how it was interpreted. As if he had finished saying what he wanted to say, Uranus pointed at the glove in Yuan's hand with his chin. It seemed like he was telling him to try it on. Swish. The opaque glove wrapped around Yuan's hand and changed as if it wasn't holding anything. The feeling of wearing it was also comfortable, as if it was his original skin. This thing is really made incredibly well. He was satisfied with the feel of the glove. You have acquired the heart of Uranus. You have acquired Uranus, desire. Rumble. A purple haze flowed out through the back of the glove. The haze circled around Yuan, and Yuan's eyes, which were looking at it, turned the same shade of purple and his mind became hazy. Is this what he meant? Anyone can become a monster. The reason why Uranus became a monster was hidden in this heart. The aura of outer that was in the black divine stone and sea god stone. In the end, he was also one of the seeds planted by the foolish chaos. Yuan looked at the haze that was wrapping around his body. A being that moved around as it changed its form, tempting him. No, Yuan's eyes narrowed as he looked at the being. Something's different. Unlike the seeds planted by the foolish chaos, the being before his eyes was unstable. It was so big, but it couldn't even create its own form. If it's a seed planted by that being, it shouldn't be this unstable. It's like a child who only grew in size. Yuan had never seen this type of outer before. Snap. The being opened its blurry mouth as if it was going to devour Yuan at any moment. He could tell the more he faced it. The existence before his eyes was the Uranus, desire, that the system spoke of. The monster you mentioned is. And Yuan had the best means to deal with that desire. You're just talking about this thing. Ababab. Dana spread her arms wide open on Yuan's shoulder. A guy who drools and makes a gulping sound. This was the only time the guy was reliable. Predator, reveals itself. Bam, its giant teeth are revealed. Desire, who had discovered the predator, turned its gaze and began to fight the larger being that threatened it. Chomp, it began to fill its belly by biting the unclear form that it couldn't catch. You have something peculiar. Uranus revealed an expression of surprise as he watched the fight between the revealed predator and desire. His gaze was directed at the maple leaf that had landed on Yuan's shoulder. Were you under his protection? It seems I worried for nothing. Uranus laughed with an embarrassed expression as the advice he had just given became meaningless. Indeed, if you have that being protecting you, then you might be fine. This little guy was protecting me. Yuan looked at the maple leaf on his shoulder. The owner of the predator that was fighting the outer that had possessed Uranus's heart. But on the outside, it was just a little guy that was only the size of a palm. Little guy, Uranus soon asked in disbelief. Does he look small in your eyes? What? Yuan was surprised and looked back at the maple leaf. Chomp, chomp. In the meantime, the predator was finishing its meal. Uranus's desire was losing strength as its body was being ripped apart by the predator. Maple Leaf's level has risen. Maple Leaf's level has risen. Maple Leaf's divine power has increased by 8. Growth rate has increased by 9.12%. Magic power has increased by 2. Uranus's desire has been eliminated. Right after desire lost its strength, the white background that was covering Yuan's surroundings slowly began to disappear. The figure of Uranus that was in front of his eyes was also the same. Outside of that, Hephaestus' workshop was faintly revealed. There wasn't much time left. How does this guy look in your eyes? Uranus saw the maple leaf differently. Maybe that was the maple leaf's original appearance. And if that was the case, Yuan wanted to know right now. But, Uranus's voice could no longer be heard. In the meantime, the scenery had completely changed. Uranus's ghost had also disappeared. In the scenery that had returned to normal, Hephaestus, Heracles, and Pandora were looking at him. How much time had passed? For a moment, Yuan felt like he had been to a different world. Are you okay? Okay. Hephaestus and Pandora approached him first. Heracles had been staring at the spot where the barrier that had been surrounding Yuan had disappeared with a strange expression. Even with the other two people's worries, Yuan stood there with a blank look on his face for a while. Their words didn't enter his ears. A different scene was still clearly in his memory and was filling his head. I couldn't hear it. The last moment, he couldn't hear Uranus's answer to his question. But that didn't mean he couldn't figure out what he had said. The shape of his mouth. Yuan moved his lips, following the shape of Uranus's mouth. He wasn't good at lip reading, but he could vaguely tell what he had said. Yuan's head lowered, the transparent glove that filled his hand. Uranus's heart. Soon, at the last moment, the heart left a message for him. We will see each other again. Chapter 200. I'll see it again. Uranus' words remained clear in his head. The encounter was brief, but the impression was strong. How on earth did the maple leaves look in his eyes? Why on earth did he leave his heart behind? Why did Zeus have a piece of his heart? And why, on what basis, did he say that they would meet again? Several unanswerable questions made his head spin. That was for a moment. Swoosh. Yuan regained his senses at the touch on his cheek. Pandora's hand. Yuan was surprised by the touch of the hand on his cheek, and Pandora opened her eyes wide and opened her mouth. Focus. It was a short word, but it wasn't difficult to understand. It meant to focus. Yuan nodded his head. He had been thinking a lot for no reason, which was not like him. Let's stop thinking useless thoughts. There was nothing he could find out by worrying about it right now anyway. If he met him again, as Uranus said, he would just have to keep it in mind until then. He would gradually learn about the maple leaves. As the guy hatched from the egg for the first time and grew again, he might gradually find his original form. For now, let's do what I can do now. His thoughts were quickly organized. Yuan looked at Uranus' heart in his hand. It was an item that looked like a translucent glove from the outside. Uranus' heart. This is the heart that the ancient high ranker completed by devouring numerous rankers. You can use the power stored in the heart. The description was simple and not particularly special. There were two cases in this case. Either the item is not that great, or the system cannot specifically literalize the effect of the item. The latter case was rare. Most of the cases where the description of the item was brief belonged to the former. Of course, that didn't mean that the latter case didn't exist. Odin's Gingnir was like that. The strongest spear in the tower. Gingnir was an item whose effect could not be properly known even through the system. Its effect was only properly exerted when the spear was held in one's hand, and even then, it had to be in Odin's hand. So this is an item comparable to that Gingnir. Rather, he was more expect. Yuan looked at the description in detail. No matter how simple the description, there was a clue about the item. Is it a kind of power source? You can use the power stored in the heart. It was the heart of the high ranker Uranus, who had fought a war against a huge guild all alone in the past. Being able to draw out the power that Uranus possessed meant that he could overcome his stats with just one item. There is only one way to find out the effect. Yuan's gaze turned to Hercules. Then, Hercules, who had been looking at Yuan naturally, met his eyes. Why, Hercules, creak. Yuan clenched his fist as if he was about to throw a punch. Can you handle it? Over the past month or so, Yuan had sparred with Heracles quite a bit. In fact, the word, sparring, was more like a one-sided beatdown. Yuan was often knocked out in a few punches from Heracles, and Yuan's punches couldn't even leave a proper wound on Heracles. But now, as much as you want. Now, things might be a little different. Heracles stood with his chest wide open, as if telling him to come in and give it a shot. As if telling him to give it his best shot. That was when Yuan was about to reach out with his hand wearing the heart of Uranus. Do you want to mess up my workshop? Hephaestus's gruff voice interrupted them. Go outside and fight. This is a sacred workshop. Yuan, who had been slightly excited, realized his mistake at those words. Normally, it would have been fine, but the heart of Uranus was an item that even he had only recently acquired. If he were to handle an unfamiliar power, he might end up putting in too much strength without realizing it. And if that happened, Hephaestus's workshop really could get damaged. Clank, clank, Hephaestus turned around and walked out of the warehouse. Having not been able to rest for a long time while making the heart of Uranus, he left first. But then, why aren't you coming out? Hephaestus's voice came from outside the warehouse. Aren't you going to continue what you were doing? It seemed that he was curious about the performance of the item he had made. There was a lot of empty land on the first floor. It was clearly the floor with the most development, but it was also the floor with the most land. A small mountain quite far from the city. Yuan and Heracles stood facing each other halfway up the mountain. This should be far enough. Heracles looked at the city far below them. The distance was enough for them to appear this small. They didn't need to cause a commotion near the city and become the talk of the town. Especially since Yuan was currently being chased by the three-horned demons. Come at me, thud. Heracles beat his wide-open chest with his fist, provoking Yuan. Hephaestus and Pandora watched the situation from behind Heracles. Yuan glanced at Hephaestus among them. Pandora isn't someone I need to worry about, but maybe. Pandora, who was among the top-ranked high-rankers, wasn't someone Yuan needed to worry about. The problem was Hephaestus. What are you worried about? At that moment, Heracles' lips curled up, noticing Yuan's concern. Don't worry, nothing dangerous will happen behind me. It was a boast full of confidence. Heracles spread his arms wide. It was a stance that said that he would never let the damage reach behind him. Yuan nodded. Of course, I'm not someone you need to worry about. Yuan thought of the titles in front of Heracles, name again. The strongest physique in the tower. Even if Zeus himself came here, it wouldn't be easy to pierce through his body. In fact, Heracles didn't get seriously injured even after getting hit by Zeus, lightning several times. I'll go with electricity. Kwang, using, Heart of Oranos. Pasususu. Magic energy began to burst out of Yuan's hand. The three pieces, which had been separated, combined into one, and the attribute unified into one. Now that he had started using the item in full force, Yuan could feel something through his body that he couldn't know through the system. It's not for nothing that he's the best blacksmith in the tower. Hephaestus used 3 items as materials to complete this item. Lightning, quina, and triangle. All of them were items that became the materials for the Heart of Oranos. However, before the heart became one, it had already been made into different items by Hephaestus. This heart contained Hephaestus, regret, blessing of the sea, is equipped to the body. This heart contained all the functions of the items Hephaestus had made so far. No, it wasn't simply 3 items combined into one. Tartarus is summoned. The name of Hell, which was in Quina, had changed. An underground deeper than Hell. The place where only those who needed extreme punishment among the dead fell into, had a greater power than Hell as it locked up dangerous beings. The deep and dark sea that Yuan fell into on the 42nd floor. That place was Tartarus. Pizzed, buzz. Yuan's face crumpled at the magic energy bursting out of his hand. The amount of magic energy gushing out of the heart exceeded the amount he could handle. Of course, the uncontrollable magic energy was bound to harm him as well. Abnormal status. Corrosion begins. He hadn't thought that he would exceed his capacity this quickly. He realized once again that his stats were severely lacking. He couldn't even handle one item, and he was struggling like this. No, rather, it's a good thing. On the contrary, it meant that the Heart of Oranos had that much power. That was how powerful the inherent magic energy of the heart and the power of Tartarus connected through the heart were. In his current state, he wasn't able to utilize the full value of the item. Abnormal status. Corrosion rises to stage 2. The unpleasant sensation and pain he felt in his hand were getting worse. He didn't have much time left. Now, Pajak. A bright halo burst out of his right hand. The halo devoured all the magic energy Yuan had released at once. And the next moment, bang, Yuan's figure disappeared from the spot. Quirang. Kururung. A thunderclap resounded through the sky. Lightning bolts erupted from the ground and shot up into the sky, creating the illusion that thunderbolts were raining down from the heavens. Amidst the crackling yellow lightning, streaks of inky black could be seen. A chaotic fusion of 2 incompatible elements. Hephaestus's eyes widened as he gazed at the lightning that had scattered through the air, now tinged with a hazy gray. Is this Uranus? He had wanted to witness firsthand the power of the item he had created with his own hands. That was why he had dragged his exhausted body all the way here. He had wondered what kind of power it would unleash when the 3 items were combined into one. He had wondered how brightly his greatest masterpiece would shine when it met its master. And now, Hephaestus was seeing what he had longed to see. Can that really be the lightning that Brad is unleashing? The energy was immense. For a moment, Hephaestus had the illusion that Zeus himself was hurling thunderbolts. Naturally, Hephaestus's gaze turned to Heracles. Yet, the energy hasn't reached him. He stood with his arms outstretched, absorbing the lightning with his entire body. Heracles did not falter in the slightest. It was because Hephaestus and Pandora were behind him. That guy really is a monster. Heracles, he was known as the strongest of Zeus's children, a top 20 high ranker. Hephaestus was once again awed by the power wielded by the top-ranked high rankers. To be able to withstand such an attack with his bare body. Crunch, Heracles looked up, still feeling the lingering sting of the electricity in his body. He had thought it would hurt a little. After all, urine had already grown enough to inflict minor wounds on him. Now that he had acquired an item superior to the thunderbolt, it went without saying. That was why Heracles had not let his guard down. Unlike during training, he had tensed his body as if in a real fight. His body, imbued with energy, had become harder than any shield in the world. But still, I braced myself and blocked it, but I still got a real wound. A wound had appeared on his chest. A charred mark, burned by the lightning. He had prided himself on having the strongest physique in the tower. Even Athena's aegis would not be harder than his body. Yet, a wound had appeared on that body. Heracles clenched his fists and looked at Urine standing before him. How the hell? And then, on Urine's face. Did you do that? For a moment, Heracles saw Zeus's face superimposed on Urine's.